first off, just like thanks so much for agreeing to do this debate. I know that not everybody is willing to come in and like defend their ideas in the free marketplace of ideas, so really appreciate that. If you want to give yourself like a quick shout out, you are absolutely welcome to do that.
Yeah, so my name is Kelly Cadigan. You can follow me on all my socials. They're all Kelly_Cadigan. Cadigan is Cadigan. I'm on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. I don't really use my Snapchat anymore. And yeah, oh, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Can I say adult content?
You can keep that a little bit on the kind of DL. Just mentioning that is enough.
That's all I need to say. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So yeah, I kind of wanted to just get started with some of like the disagreements based off of your response video. I think that'd be a kind of a good way to highlight what some of those main points of contention were, and just try to like dispel what those are. So
absolutely,
I saw that the first thing was that you really took issue with the pediatric cancer analogy, where you said that. So first of all, I don't know why we're comparing cancer to being transgender. I just feel like it's not the same at all, but whatever. And like obviously, I recognize that pediatric cancer and gender dysphoria are very different things. But this is an analogy. I think you might fundamentally misunderstand the purpose of my analogy, so I can just explain my position like a lot more explicitly. So,
sure.
I have a fundamental moral belief in reducing harm, reducing suffering in this world. Do you also share this kind of general moral belief?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, awesome. So, as an instantiation of this principle of reducing harm, reducing suffering, if we have a body of medical doctors, scientists, and researchers who are establishing evidence-based guidelines which are shown to reduce harm, to reduce suffering, based off of this risk-benefit analysis, then I support that treatment being available to those who would benefit from it. And so, because of that, instantiation of this belief, the evidence-based guidelines show that chemotherapy reduces harm, suffering, and death in kids with pediatric cancer. So we should provide it. The evidence-based guidelines show that antidepressants reduce harm, suffering, and suicide in teens with depression. So we should provide it.
Do you not think there's a line there, like when it comes to what we're talking about?
Yeah, there absolutely is a line. I think that the line is drawn at harm. And once again, because the evidence-based guidelines show that gender-affirming care reduces harm, suffering, and suicide in teens with gender dysphoria, we should provide it.
Right, but even just like outside of not even talking about trans, I think you said something along the lines of like medications for like mental health. I think it's been, there have been a lot of studies that have shown those medications aren't very safe and can lead to like, I don't know, addictions or mental problems. Like I wouldn't say those medications are free from side effects. There are plenty of parents who decide to not give their kids medications that doctors recommend just based off of them doing their own research and having concerns.
Yeah, right? I hear your concerns completely. I mean, it is a fact about the world of medicine that every single medication is going to have side effects. And so that's why we have doctors and psychiatrists and researchers working together to do risk-benefit analyses and determine which medicines end up helping people in the long run based off of a risk-benefit analysis. And I absolutely trust, doctors and scientists and researchers, especially looking at the research myself, to show that, yeah, these medicines are absolutely efficacious at reducing harm in people, especially based off of risk-benefit analysis with lots of screening and diagnoses involved.
Well, do you trust Big Pharma?
I don't think Big Pharma is the same thing as, like, the kind of research and evidence which goes into, like, figuring out which kinds of medicine are efficacious. But I'm somebody who, I believe in socialized medicine. I think that we should absolutely nationalize the pharmaceutical industry and run it as non-for-profit by the government, to remove the influence of Big Pharma, and particularly the ways in which they'll do like market manipulation.
Here's the thing though, Big Pharma is just undeniably connected to medicine though, right? They create a majority of medications as far as I know. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything about Big Pharma, but they're undeniably connected, right?
So
like they're there to make money. They want to put people on these prescriptions, probably people that don't necessarily need them, so that they can continue to get their profits. I mean, look at how much, what's that medication that people are on right now that like is running out? I forget what it's called.
Insulin? Adderall?
Adderall. There are so many people who are on Adderall now, but it wasn't like that 30, 40 years ago. And now we have people who are really addicted to that. And that is supposed to be like a life-saving medication, right? Or helping with your mental health.
Yeah, actually.
So to me, it's like there are definitely medications going around that are for profit, that are being prescribed by doctors, which I would like to know, is it A, they're just, believing Big Pharma way too much, or are they in on it for the profit as well? I don't know.
To be clear, every single medicine in a capitalist society with this for-profit healthcare system is going to make money for big pharma. Even cancer treatment is profitable for big pharma, and they are going to want to provide cancer treatment because it makes them money. And so that's why I would nationalize the pharmaceutical industry. Would you also do the same?
Could you explain what you mean by nationalize?
Yeah, so essentially this would mean that instead of having private companies which produce medicines and sell them for profit, we would have the government run the production of medicine in a non-profit format.
How would that work in terms of like the economy? Like, where is that money coming from?
Yeah, it would be publicly funded by taxes, and also the government would end up taking over the existing institutions. I'm providing a solution for the profit incentives of big pharma. If you're not into the idea of like socialized medicine, then what's your solution to the profit incentives of big pharma?
Go back to like any point in history before we had these medications, or at least a majority of them. People were fine. I mean, people may have like had their issues, but like mental health like has gone like up apparently, right? Like we have a mental health crisis in this country.
Yeah, why is that?
I feel like a lot of that has to do with the medications that big pharma is putting out. We people in this country are more medicated than they have ever been in history.
Yeah, because we have more medications now than we have ever done before. But like, I
guess think it's a good thing we're putting.
What's your solution?
Do you think a person that should be healthy, like, should be putting anything in their body? I would hope you would want the majority of Americans to not have to be on medication, to just be born healthy. Isn't that the goal?
I mean, sure, but if people benefit from medicine, then I think that they should probably take that medicine.
Right. But you're also, if we come back to like our main topic, you're calling life-changing medicine and gender-affirming care necessary and life-saving, which I don't personally agree with.
Well, it absolutely is life-saving. I mean,
it's really not, though.
You don't think that like there's an association between giving children gender-affirming treatment and a reduction in the lifetime suicidality? Do you have evidence to like disprove that?
I mean, a lot of your evidence, your peer-reviewed evidence, is very like, they came to conclusions with like very small studies of very small groups of people.
Okay,
and
do you have better
data
data?
Is based off of like, I really want to know when they're like, oh, it's like based off of, they said they had less levels of depression after transitioning. I'm like, what does that mean? How do you get that information out of someone, right?
You can read the study and find out how they did that.
Someone. And if you think about the pressure, I'm sorry,
Kelly,
I just want to say something.
I think you didn't, wait.
If you think about the pressure that this community puts on detransitioners, anytime someone posts a video about detransitioning, all the comments are horrid. You guys pretty much attack people who detransition. I'm not saying you personally, but a lot of people in the community on the far left do that. So it does not surprise me that probably in a lot of these studies, a lot of these people don't even want to admit that they're not happy, or that like they feel like detransitioning, or that
wait, and also, if people get backlash on social media, hold up. I need to stop you right there. Hold up. I need to stop you right there. Like, if people get like backlash on social media, they're not going to get backlash on like an anonymous peer-reviewed study. So there's no reason for them to lie in that scenario. But you were asking like, how did they tell that these kids were less depressed? You would have known that if you actually read the study that I cited for you. So essentially what they did,
they're less depressed. You have to
I can tell you what they did.
Please explain it to me, Naomi. Please explain it
gladly.
To me.
So
how did
what
they
find out
that they were less depressed? Yeah, give me the information.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. So what they did was they used diagnostic screening criteria for clinical depression. And what they found is that compared to before treatment versus after treatment, 60% less of the trans youth even qualified for the clinical diagnostic criteria of clinical depression. And if you know anything about
again, can you clarify how they were telling like the different levels of depression? What is this amazing technology I've never heard of?
Yeah, they used screening criteria from, I think it was the PHQ-9 or the PHQ-8. What was it called?
Can you tell me the title of the source you're referring to?
This was the first study I cited in my source. It was the
mental health outcomes in transgender and non-binary youth receiving gender-affirming care.
It was the PHQ-9, which is a standard like depression screening diagnostic criteria.
In that particular study, it literally states only 60% were doing much better with their depression.
Yeah.
If you know anything about science, at least when I was in high school and college, you need to have like an at least 95% success rate for your study to be accurate. 60% is a very low statistic.
Actually, in terms of depression studies, 60% is amazing. In terms of the research we have on antidepressants, for example, the average antidepressant has a depression remission rate of just 30%. And the best antidepressants we have on the market have a depression remission rate of 50.78%. I can give you a citation for this. But
that's exactly why we shouldn't have these medications on the market, and why we shouldn't be giving them to people.
In this study,
because they have these side effects.
Hold up. In this study, the treatment for gender dysphoria was more effective at alleviating depression than the best antidepressants we have on the market. Are you opposed to providing treatment for depression with antidepressants too?
I think it should be a very strong case scenario. Same with like transgenderism. I feel like you need to have strong body dysmorphia or gender dysphoria. I mean, I apologize. To transition, because honestly, if you only have a little bit of depression, I don't think you should be medicated. You probably should go to therapy, or there's probably something in your life that's causing this. And also this study that you're referencing, by the way, like a lot of your studies, it had 104 people. You're basing all transgender people off of 104 people study.
104 is a pretty decent sample size.
Only 60% felt 60% were doing better with their depression. That's 40% of those 104 people, almost half that aren't feeling happy.
How big of a
Are you going to ignore them?
How big of a sample size do you think we need to run a decent experiment?
I gotta be honest with you. I was actually kind of impressed with the study. Let me see if I can find it.
I'm just asking you, in general,
how many? That's titled "Pubertal Suppression for Transgender Youth and Risk of Unaliving Idolation." I was actually kind of impressed with that one because it had over 20,000 people until I read the details and realized it was actually just 85 people if you really did the math out.
It was actually 89 people if you would have read the study instead of just doing some napkin math.
Oh my God, there's a reason I said about 85 people on my video. Are you really going to nitpick me on that?
Well, no, I'm just pointing out that you're just doing napkin math on an abstract without really reading these studies. But anyways,
I mean, it literally, my question to you, the article, I'm pretty sure it said around. It gave
my question to you,
and then I did the math out on a calculator, and it was a decimal, but whatever.
Yeah, it's a difference of 4, not a difference of a decimal, if you would have actually read the study. But anyways, what I'm talking about, my question to you is do you know anything about the statistical method and kind of what's an appropriate sample size for a given study?
No, I don't. Why don't you?
So you're just basing it on feelings?
I'm basing it on common sense.
On common sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So your feelings.
I don't think that because I think it's pretty obvious that big pharma and the government and everything is pretty connected, and a lot of these things are for profit. So many people survived and were happy without these medications that we're giving to people all the time, and now they're all hooked on them, and we have all these mental health issues. Do you not think
Kelly,
the increase in mental?
No,
let me speak. You're not letting me speak. I let you speak, let me speak. Do you not think the increase in mental health issues in this country is due to big pharma prescribing medications to people who don't really need them?
I think that there certainly are things we can do to have better screening criteria, but in general, from what I've seen in these studies, is that the treatment is overwhelmingly very effective. But you asked me about what's appropriate for a sample size in order to conduct a statistical survey, so I'd like to get back to that. We actually have math we can do in order to estimate kind of what's a decent sample size for a given population. And the higher proportional population that a certain group is, kind of the bigger sample you're going to need in order to have a representative sample. And so a group of people that makes up about 2% of the population, which is kind of an upper bound estimate of trans people, you would need a sample
size.
Especially
non-binary people.
Yeah, you would need a sample size of 31 people in order to have a statistically significant sample with a 95% confidence level. So these studies are 3 times that margin, which under these statistical methods and the math that we use to do this, it seems this is a pretty good sample size.
I kind of feel I get your point, but I kind of feel it's irrelevant because as much as you have your peer-reviewed essays, right, or articles, whatever you want to call them, I found some sources.
You think that the math is irrelevant because of your feelings?
Not because of my feelings. If you want to pretend that's what I'm saying,
you said it was because of your common sense.
It's not. It's facts over feelings. That's what I believe in.
Common sense is feelings, not facts. I know that I'm
biologically a male. I'm not afraid to admit that I'm a biological male. That doesn't make me want to cry. I'm not La La Land,
Okay, that has nothing to do with what I just said. But I don't see why you're disputing statistical rigorous methods that are based in math and science because of your common sense feelings.
Why are you going to act like that was so irrelevant when you literally said oh, it's based on your feelings and not facts, when you can't even admit the fact that you're biologically male just like me?
I mean, biologically, I'm a transsexual female. My biology is pretty different from a cissexual male in lots of ways that are relevant in biological and medical context. So I'm not going to lie to people and say that I'm just the same as a biological male in order to appeal to conservatives.
How so? Are you intersex?
I mean, if you start taking like medical transition hormones, for example, essentially you are medically inducing an intersex condition, which does affect your biological functions and medical needs.
Or we're just biological men who are taking female hormones, you know?
Yeah, and that cause you to develop female sex characteristics in certain aspects, thus changing your
Okay.
biology.
That's not changing your DNA.
I didn't say it changes your DNA. I said it changes aspects of your biology.
Okay.
You do know that biology is more than just DNA,
But your
right?
DNA is still male. So why
Yeah,
does that
I
matter?
do have
It's
XY
clearly different from a
chromosomes.
biological
Who
woman,
cares?
right?
Yeah, obviously the difference between transsexual females and cissexual females. I'm saying that my medical needs are more in line with intersex people, not with cissexual males.
Okay. I mean, if you want to believe it that way, that's fine.
Just like
I don't really
factually
think of
true.
my transition in that way. I don't know.
Wait,
I think that's a very interesting way to put it.
Do you think that your biology hasn't changed at all from taking hormones?
I think my hormones have changed from taking hormones.
Right, and hormones cause your body to, it causes your genes to express different traits and you develop different characteristics. Like, for example, growing breasts.
Okay, does that take away from the fact that I'm a male who's taking estrogen to get secondary female sex characteristics? Like,
I mean,
I'm still
I didn't say it
biologically
changes
male.
your chromosomes. Like, when you say biologically male, are you just referring to, like, chromosomes?
I'm referring to chromosomes and DNA.
Okay, because, like, there's a lot more to biology than just chromosomes and DNA.
Oh my God. We were born with male genitalia.
Yeah, I know that.
We were born men.
Yeah, I know that. I'm not disputing
Deny that fact. Why are you like dancing around it?
I'm not disputing that at all. I'm just recognizing that my biology's changed because of the hormones I take in certain aspects. That's just a fact.
Okay, great. Yes, our biology, I'll give you that. It's changed in certain aspects. It doesn't mean we're women, and it doesn't mean that we're not biologically men.
I mean, like, it depends on, like, how you're going to, like, categorize what makes somebody biologically male or female. Like, obviously, in terms of my chromosomes and my DNA, it's going to be more in line with your typical cis male. But in terms of things like my external phenotype, it's going to be a lot more similar to, like a female person. It really depends on, like, what kind of category you're talking about. For example, like, some aspects of medicine depend a lot more on whether or not your endocrine system is estrogen dominant versus testosterone dominant. Other medical biological factors might depend on certain, like, DNA traits. It really just depends. That's why I'm saying that, like, essentially a medical transition is like medically inducing an intersex condition.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
If you want to phrase it that way, go for it. But I don't need to cope that way.
It's not a cope, it's just acknowledging reality.
All right, difference of opinion.
Wait, what did I say that's not real?
I mean, to me personally, it just feels like a way of coping with reality.
By stating the truth about my biology and recognizing that biology is more complicated than what you learned in elementary school?
You're going out of your way to phrase it in a very specific way to deny the reality of what we actually are.
I'm not denying any reality. I'm just explaining that reality is more simple, like more complicated than these simple ideas about sex you learned in elementary school.
Well, I mean, I think it is a pretty simple concept. There's men and women. Men are typically born with male genitalia. Females are typically born with female genitalia. It's just how it's always worked since the beginning of time.
Nobody's disputing that.
You kind of are, though, because you're acting like gender really like doesn't exist. Like, oh, you're not a man or a woman. You're like you're something in between, right?
Well, if I'm talking about like gender identity, that doesn't really have anything to do with like biological sex, because gender identity and biological sex are different words that refer to different things.
I completely agree with you. I still think most of the time sex and gender line up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do
There's a very strong correlation there.
Yeah. But I always like to clarify that when I say that.
Good. So I guess, like, did you think there was anything wrong with what I was saying about biology?
I'm sorry, anything wrong about what?
What I was saying about biology.
Have you seen this Naomi TikTok?
About biology? I mean, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think you're dancing around the reality. Because calling yourself, oh, I induced an intersex condition. To me, the only people who are actually intersex are the people who are genuinely born that way, who are born with like both parts or like some version of that.
Well,
you and I, we weren't born intersex. We were born biological men, and we went out of our way to go on HRT and get estrogen, the female hormone, and testosterone blockers to block our male hormones, correly?
Right.
I honestly think it might be a little offensive if intersex people heard you say that.
I have lots of friends in the intersex community, and I'm a pretty strong intersex advocate. But what I was saying, I use the term transsexual to refer to the biological reality of medically transitioned trans people. I was trying to explain it to you because you seemed confused as to why like a transsexual biology would be different than like a cissexual biology. And so I said, essentially, you know, when you medically transition and become transsexual, what you're essentially doing is it's like inducing an intersex condition. But yeah, I obviously recognize that intersex typically refers to people who are born with mixed sex characteristics or who naturally develop mixed sex characteristics during puberty.
Right, but you weren't saying it was like you quite literally said I induced an intersex condition on myself.
I said it was essentially
so I'm not
like doing that.
What does essentially mean then?
Like,
is that not like
kind
much
of
the
like
same thing?
Yeah, but via a different process.
Okay, I mean I can't speak for the intersex community because I don't know any of them, but like personally, I
can
think
tell.
they might think that was a little offensive.
I talk to the intersex community quite a bit.
You also have a huge platform, so people might be scared to talk up to you.
I mean, your platform's 7 times my size, so.
Yeah, but I can have a conversation with anybody. I'm super open.
Okay, cool. All right, did you want to move on
can I bring up one of the points I had?
You wanted to bring something up? Okay, sure.
I mean, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I don't want to
like.
Okay, so I found a study that I really wanted to bring up.
Oh, awesome. I love studies.
So gender dysphoria, it's titled Gender Dysphoria in Young People is Rising, and so is Professional Disagreement. A lot of European countries have issued guidance to limit medical intervention for minors. In a recent analysis of insurance claims by the Komodo Health found that nearly 18,000 minors began taking puberty blockers from 2017 to 2021. So that's a huge increase in numbers of kids or not even just kids, just people transitioning in general, which I already think is a bad sign because to me, it kind of just feels like a cash grab. We had less than 2% of people transitioning before like 2014, 2015. And now all of a sudden numbers are skyrocketing in adults and children.
Yeah,
which I guess you can argue, oh, the exposure, people are feeling more accepted. So they're not hiding anymore. I get you can have that argument.
Yeah,
I don't really think it's true.
More people are recognizing that they're trans, just like how when we stopped demonizing left-handedness, more people were able to safely come out as being left-handed. I mean, do you have like any evidence that like it's not the case, that it's just because we're no longer marginalizing, ostracizing trans people, at least to the same extent as we used to, that now more people are able to safely come out as trans?
So this is a peer-reviewed article from the British Medical Journal, and they had surveys aiming to measure prevalence they had surveys that were aiming to measure prevalence that had found that 2% of high school age teens are identifying as transgender now, which is crazy to me. These young people are also more likely than their cisgender peers to have concurrent mental health and neurodiverse conditions, including depression, anxiety, and attention deficit disorders. The number of private clinics that focus on providing hormones and surgeries have grown a ton in the past few decades. There's more than 100 today.
Right. We all acknowledge that there's more people.
Tell you that this is a money-making game, that people,
no.
doctors want to get in on the surgeries, places that put out HRT want to get on, getting people hooked on hormones. Like, for example, I just had bottom surgery. Obviously, that's what I wanted, but like, I have to have estrogen for the rest of my life now. I am technically a slave to the pharmaceutical industry, and they're going to have my money for life. Do you not think there could be some intent there that like we really want to encourage people to transition? So we can get, more infertility. We can get people.
So you've gone into like a lot of points now. Once again, I would nationalize the pharmaceutical industry because I don't think that we should be running medicine for profit, and you don't seem to have a solution for that. But
you just want to tax everybody. You just want to up taxes for that.
You do know that we have studies which show that nationalizing the pharmaceutical industry is going to be cheaper for everyone in the long run because it cuts out the middleman of like private insurance companies. It cuts out the middleman of like advertising for pharmaceuticals. It cuts out all of these middlemen and bureaucracy which exists because of capitalism, and it's actually way cheaper in the long run. So I'm trying to save people money. I don't know why you're trying to like make people like spend more money on healthcare.
You're telling me that the public is going to be paying for everyone's health treatment, and you're telling me that's not going to make people's taxes skyrocket. You're saying that's going to all even out.
Well, you would no longer have to pay for healthcare because it's going to be included in your taxes and ends up being cheaper in the long run for everyone. That's just what the studies show. I mean, you can Google that if you don't believe me.
It also makes us like Canada, where you have to wait 1 million years to be even seen anywhere, even in an emergency situation. Do you think that's fine?
We have way more doctors here, and we could absolutely fulfill the needs of our patients without overcharging them out the wazoo, and while eliminating this for-profit system, which you seem to recognize. For-profit healthcare is not a good thing.
Very strong assumption. Is there a study for that?
I mean, we do have studies on the outcomes of socialized medicine, and the outcomes are better than what we have here.
Okay, I mean, I don't really.
I know that you feel differently than the facts, and you can have your feelings, but the studies are pretty clear.
You literally just send me peer-reviewed articles that have less than like 200 people, and you call it fact. Unfortunately, that's not reality. I know like the internet wants to tell you if you find any peer-reviewed article that it's legitimate, but here I am trying to show you peer-reviewed articles that say the opposite of what you're saying, but you don't want to hear me out on that.
Not at all. I've been listening to what you said.
You just want to believe the peer-reviewed articles that support
what your peer-reviewed article said.
What
your peer-reviewed article said is that more people are identifying as trans, more people are coming out, and more people are accessing gender-affirming healthcare. I don't disagree with any of that.
Well,
I think that is a fact. And hold up. The reason why that's happening is because more people are able to safely come out as trans. You haven't presented any evidence that it's not because more people are able to safely come out as trans.
You also said that like less than 1% of people end up detransitioning, right? 2 recent studies have suggested that as many as 20 to 30% of patients may discontinue hormone treatment within a few years.
Can you give me those citations?
And that's from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
Can you give me those citations? Because I think I might know the ones that you're talking about, and they're not very good studies on like assessing the actual detransition rate.
They're peer-reviewed. It's from the British Medical Journal. You're going to tell me they're
not legit? I'm asking for the citation on those studies, not the original citation.
Absolutely. How can I send that to you? Without like
you can like give me the link in Discord. I think it's going to be referencing the one English study that had a like crazy weird and small sample size and conflated detransition and regrets in strange ways, as well as the military study, which has a lot of methodological flaws in terms of like how you would actually assess detransition.
So why is it when I bring up a peer-reviewed article, you can just say, oh, it's not legit, but then everyone in my comments, when I say that your peer-reviewed articles aren't legit, everyone can just say, oh, I'm spreading misinformation.
Well, I know
Are you not spreading misinformation? I know the studies that you're referring to, and they don't really prove the claim that you think they prove, because you really haven't read those studies, have you? I haven't read, dude, that was a literal quote I just read to you.
I'm saying you haven't read the studies that it's citing. Like, I'm aware of the studies that's citing. That's a misuse of those citations.
Me that you keep telling me I'm not reading these things when I literally, you can ask my boyfriend, I've been literally feeling like I'm back in high school. I've been like reading so many articles and like trying to understand. Like, I really take offense to that because that's such BS.
So I'm pretty sure I know the citations you're talking about, and they don't really prove the claim you think they said. Yeah, I've been asking for it the entire time.
Yeah, if you actually listen to me, I was going to say it's a really small link, so I could literally just tell you.
Please give me the link.
www.bmj.com/content/380/BMJ.P382.
Okay. And so the claim that 2 recent studies suggest that as many as 20 to 30% of patients discontinue hormone treatment. That's citations number 10 and 11. Let me go ahead and grab the... So have you read the citations 10 and 11 themselves, or did you just read like the BMJ article?
I read a majority of it, and yeah.
Did you read
I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Did you read the citations which it cited to know like why they're saying it's like 20 to 30%? Or did you just trust the one article?
Do I need the citations to know why they're saying that? It's from the British Medical Journal. Do I need to do that?
Yeah, it's a pretty bad invocation of those citations.
Really? So explain how.
So one of the studies, I believe, was the English study that had a very weird and small sample, which essentially what they did was they conflated anybody...
Like a lot of your studies?
They conflated...
Like a lot of yours that you've brought up?
It was a sample of like 20, if I remember correctly, which is way smaller.
Which is way smaller. Like 50 people, dude.
I gave you studies that had 89 and 104 people, not 50. But what I was saying was that what that study did, which is really dishonest, is that they conflated anybody who stopped taking hormones as a detransitioner. And when I actually read the study, what I found is that I think it was half or more than half of these people they count as detransitioners were people who they were non-binary and they only wanted to be on hormones for a couple of years because they wanted to obtain like androgynous bodies and sex characteristics. And that was actually their intended treatment path, was that they wanted to be on hormones for a couple of years and discontinue them. So counting them as like detransitioners or people who regretted their transition is pretty flawed in nature. The other study that it cites...
Why is that flawed in nature? Explain to me why that's flawed.
Because they don't regret transitioning. They just only want to be on hormones for a couple of years.
So do you not think that proves that some kids jump into transition, or even adults, without realizing that, or taking the time to make sure and go to therapy because of the easy access to HRT?
No, they wanted this. They wanted to have androgynous bodies because they were non-binary. Like that was their desired outcome.
Yikes.
What's wrong with that?
I just don't agree with it. I don't know.
You just don't agree with somebody that wants to have like an androgynous non-binary body?
Do you really think that's mentally healthy, that someone wants to be something in between male and female?
Yeah.
Sorry, just give me one sec.
Yeah, there are like intersex people. Plenty of intersex people live happy, healthy, perfectly dignified lives and love their intersex bodies, for example.
Yeah, because that's not okay, though.
It's perfectly okay. Plenty of intersex conditions don't impact life expectancy in any kind of negative way. What's wrong with being intersex?
But you know it's not normal, right? Like, even we're not normal, but at least we try to fit in the binary. Do you really think people like that are mentally sane?
Yeah.
Be wait. In between, were you trying to say surgically...
Were you trying to say that I might be offensive to the intersex community? I mean, you're practically dehumanizing intersex people at this point.
Intersex people are not the same thing as non-binary because they're born that way.
I never said that.
Non-binary people.
You asked me if it's like mentally healthy to live like in between the sexes, for example, and I said yes.
It's not.
For example,
it's not right.
There are why is it not right? There are plenty of intersex people who live happy, healthy lives in between the sexes.
See, this is where we come back to that thing called common sense. You know, obviously someone wanting to be something in between is just illogical. It's not natural. We're not natural, but at least we're attempting to fit in the binary to at least seem natural in society. These people are, it feels like you're trying to disrupt society. Like you're trying to make everyone want to be genderless, which frankly, I think is a huge concern.
I mean,
especially for our children. And the fact that you said my 7-year-old cousin isn't a problem for identifying as non-binary, dude, that is just so out of line. Like, why do you want children messing with their pronouns? They're kids.
Yeah, because kids can express themselves how they want, and as long as they're not harming anyone, there's literally no problem. Just like how intersex
you're harming
people...
their mental health.
Can I finish?
You're trying
hold up. I let you finish. Can I please finish? I gave you some real time to speak. So lots of people are perfectly comfortable being non-binary or being intersex. Just because something isn't normal doesn't mean it's wrong or bad. That's like the ad populum logical fallacy. For example, so people who are rich are not normal. That doesn't intrinsically mean that being rich is bad. So just saying because non-binary people or intersex people are out of the normal doesn't prove that it's wrong or bad. And your appeal to common sense
You did not just compare money to gender identity.
I'm showing you why the ad populum fallacy doesn't work. Your entire argument is just the ad populum logical fallacy. That being normal,
I know, just
not
your
being normal is wrong.
Sometimes are just so crazy because
so
that's just not
I have general logical moral principles, and then I apply them universally across scenarios because my morals and beliefs are consistent and logical. And I hope that yours would be the same too.
I don't think non-binary people are logical. I think they are illogical.
What's wrong with being non-binary?
Like if you're transgender, you transition to male or you transition to female and you try to fit in the binary and you try to blend into society and you want to try to pass. That's what it means to be transgender. That's what it meant to be trans before 2014. And now it's just become entirely something else.
So what's wrong with being non-binary?
The children really negatively.
So like, wait, what's wrong with being non-binary?
So I don't think there's anything wrong. Like, I don't think anyone should go to jail for identifying as non-binary, but that doesn't change the fact that I just think it's illogical.
Okay, well, you're allowed to feel how you want, but like why do you take issue with non-binary people?
Right? But can I just explain, like, for me and my transition, I'm able to like blend into society. Like, I love the way I look. I'm not like trying to disrupt society. To me, non-binary people feel like they're going out of their way to just be different, and they're not even making a transition. And then on top of that, they're almost like taking away what it means to be trans to me, because now non-binary people want to call themselves trans And half of them don't even make any sort of transition.
Okay,
it's
well,
just so
you're
like,
allowed,
borderline offensive to me.
You're allowed to do what you want, and you're also like allowed to like reclaim the term transsexual if you want to specifically talk about the lived experiences of people who medically transition. But I just don't see why you should like gatekeep non-binary people's existence, or be like, no, it's wrong for you to identify as non-binary if you're like, for example, 7 years old.
But like when people look at like, I feel like the
what's
goal of
wrong
every
with
trans
that?
person should be passed. Like when people look at me, they see a woman. No one's gonna look at a non-binary person and be like, oh, they're non-binary.
You'd be surprised.
Like you're not trying to
there's
like
some pretty,
be anything.
There's
you're,
some
you're
pretty
just like transitioning a pronoun.
Hold up. There's some pretty androgynous non-binary people out there that when I see them, I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm gonna go with a they them to be safe.
That's because you're a leftist.
Have you seen
Okay.
this Naomi TikTok?
So like once again,
not
like,
everyone's
what's
like
wrong with somebody who is like 7 years old figuring out that they're non-binary and identifying as non-binary? What's wrong with that?
Because you're corrupting a child.
How does
you're
that
putting
corrupt
it,
a child?
why does a child need to know what non-binary is? They've never needed to know what this is in all of history. Now we need to do this.
Well, we do have studies.
What's going to happen if my 7-year-old cousin decides, oh, TikTok's telling me that I'm allowed to go on HRT whenever I want. Why don't I take some testosterone since I'm using he, him pronouns?
Well, they're going to have to
happen then?
They're going
to
have
they
to
get
talk,
to be like 14, 15, and all of a sudden they regret their decisions.
They're
and
going
they
to
have
have to
body. Like that's cool.
They're going to have to talk to doctors and psychiatrists undergoing months and years of consultation and therapy. I mean, the WPATH standards for accessing puberty blockers, not even cross-sex hormones, just puberty blockers, requires 6 months of gender therapy in order to access that treatment, which is largely reversible. That is the WPATH standards. Yeah.
It is extremely easy. Okay, I was asking because in my experience, and I've talked to I've had 3 different therapists in my life. I've had 1 psychiatrist in my life, and all of them, and they were highly reviewed. It was so easy to convince them I was trans, to convince them I needed to go on HRT. And I've heard this from other trans people too. Now it's actually even easier
because you're trans.
When I was trans. I have people just going to Planned Parenthood now without even going to a therapist, and they can get HRT. I literally know a friend.
That's adult.
I don't want to say his name, but he transitioned to male and got testosterone.
You're conflating
at Planned Parenthood.
There's a problem. You're conflating adults with children. Adults can access HRT through informed consent in the US, that's true. But children can't. Children have to go through consultation and therapy before they can even access puberty blockers, let alone cross-sex hormones.
And I just told you that literally within 3 therapy sessions, I was starting the process of HRT. It is not that difficult. These therapists want to make you think you're trans. I swear to God.
Well, that's because
you're
acting
trans. Like it's it's so hard to go to a therapist and convince them you're trans. You know very well it's not that difficult to get access to HRT.
As an adult, no, but as a child, you do need to go through consultation and therapy.
I was 15 years old. I was 15. Actually, I was 14 when I was in therapy before HRT.
Yeah, showing that you went to therapy over at least 6 months, right?
I think, no, it was literally after my 3rd session.
How often were you having sessions?
I think it was once a week. I don't know, something like that.
So I don't know if they were not following the WPATH standards, but the WPATH standards require 6 months of gender therapy and a persistent gender dysphoria diagnosis. And I mean,
and even
look,
so,
I want to be clear. If there are ways that we can do better diagnostic screening criteria, I'm all for that. But banning people from transitioning as minors is not even going to allow us to do the research that's going to help us improve outcomes.
So I also wanted to get on that topic because something that probably the thing that bothered me the most about your video is that you said puberty blockers don't cause sterilization, or that they're not likely to. I think that is literally just false.
Okay, so you do know that my claim is that if somebody takes puberty blockers for a year or 2, and then they go off puberty blockers, they're able to regain fertility, typically within about a year. Obviously, if you go on to take cross-sex hormones,
that's
you're going to
not true.
She went on to take cross-sex hormones. She didn't stop the puberty blockers to undergo her endogenous puberty.
That's not what Gigi said in her video. I watched that whole thing that she completely came off of HRT, just coming off of estrogen.
Hold up, that's not what I said.
Staying on the T blockers.
Kelly,
there's no
Kelly, that's not what I said.
Sperm.
Kelly, that's not what I said. She went on HRT. I'm talking about somebody who just goes on puberty blockers. Do you have any evidence, any kind of hold up, I'm not finished. Do you have any kind of evidence or peer-reviewed study which would show that somebody who's only gone on puberty blockers and then gone off just the puberty blockers resuming their natal puberty is now rendered permanently infertile at like a statistically significant rate?
Yeah, I do. And you know that because I already provided you that evidence. I literally put it in a reply on Twitter and you saw it. It's literally on the company website. When you go to the website for Lupron, it is literally in the side effects that this can cause permanent infertility.
I remember reading it said it can. What's the rate of that?
And it's and the longer you're on it, at least according to my doctors, and I had 2 of them working with me who were that was all they did. They were specifically in like an HRT department in Portland, Maine. They knew what they were talking about. And I was told, I don't know if your experience is spirolactone, but I was told the longer you're on Lupron, and if it's more than a year, by year 2, you're going to be even more likely to not be able to produce healthy sperm when you come off of it. So if I started taking that at 15 and I decided I wasn't the type of person who wanted to get the surgery and I was like 25 and I was like, oh, I'm ready to have a kid. And I was told all my life by the leftist community that like Lupron's fine. And it's just all the side effects are reversible. I come off it. I go to a bank just like Gigi's doing, right? Because Gigi thought the same thing. She believed what you said. She thought, I'll come off the blockers. I'll be able to go and get a healthy sample.
Gigi's not a case of what we're talking about because Gigi was on HRT.
Now she's probably not going to be able to have a biological kid because you're spreading misinformation like that.
Kelly, Gigi's not the kind of case that I'm talking about because Gigi went on HRT. I'm asking you, what is the rate at which somebody who's only been on puberty blockers is rendered permanently infertile because of those puberty blockers? From my understanding, from what I've seen, hold up, I've let you talk a lot. I've let you talk a lot. Please let me finish. From what I've seen in the peer-reviewed academic literature, it seems to be the case that it is one of those exceptionally rare side effects, which, you know how like every medicine is going to have this gigantic long list of extremely rare side effects? I mean, even medicine like Tylenol say that it can cause liver disease, for example. That's one of those exceptionally rare side effects, and I have not seen any study which shows that this is like a statistically significant, huge concern for somebody who's just on puberty blockers. But now, if you want to talk about, hold up. If you want to talk about
that cause infertility, not estrogen.
It typically would be the suppression of like the natal sex hormone, which would make you infertile.
Right. So why are you acting like estrogen's even at play here? What does it matter if someone's on estrogen or not?
Well, because that means they're going to continue.
Infertility is the blockers.
You do know that estrogen suppresses testosterone too, right? Well, anyways, what I'm talking about is
not enough to a degree to cause infertility. You know that.
It certainly does if you do like estrogen monotherapy, for example. There are protocols which do this. I'm on estrogen monotherapy, for example.
That little blocker will, but Lupron
okay, hold up. It's if you're on these hormones continuously that you'll be rendered infertile while you're on the hormones. And if you go off the hormones, then there's a chance you're going to be rendered permanently infertile. From what I've seen about puberty blockers alone, it seems the chance of being rendered permanently infertile from puberty blockers alone is exceptionally rare. But I want to be clear. I do care about the fertility of trans people, and I think that we can have improved consultation and screening and access to fertility counseling, and even gender clinics providing fertility banking as a service on the spot. I'm all for these kind of pushes for better education and opportunities to access fertility banking. But because you just keep saying shut it all down, you can't even provide this fertility banking for trans teenagers.
You didn't even give me a source. You just said, oh, I've reviewed a peer-reviewed article that says that puberty blockers alone don't cause infertility, even though the website says it does.
Do you want some sources? I gave you that peer-reviewed source, which I know you didn't read.
Which peer-reviewed source? Give me the title, because I have them all right here. I have all my comments.
Yeah, the one from The Lancet, titled The Importance of Informed Fertility Counseling for Trans Young People. I mean, the source I cited literally says in the title that fertility counseling for trans people is important. And
see, I'm so glad I have this written down because I wouldn't know this, but literally that thing you're claiming was 1% of trans people regret having bottom surgery. Half of our community that identifies as trans doesn't even want to get the surgery anymore.
Kelly,
that was such like a shady thing for you to do.
That's not the study I'm talking about. Kelly, you're talking about a different study. I'm talking about the Lancet article. The importance of
informed fertility counseling for trans young people.
Right, that had nothing to do with bottom surgery.
Maybe I just have this in the wrong place, but I'm pretty sure. Give me a second.
That was the one where you said, and I quote, "And if you don't believe me, you want to believe this article. I don't know if this article is about spironolactone. I don't know." The article doesn't mention spironolactone anywhere, but you would have known that if you read the article, right?
I apologize. I put that in the wrong spot. I thought it was under a different tab.
Also, you questioning the legitimacy of the Lancet of all journals is quite something. The Lancet is literally...
I just think it's quite something that you're pretending like you, after one article, you're like, oh, I don't have any evidence that says Lupron alone will cause this, but Lupron with estrogen, that's a different thing. But then you're telling me that estrogen
the idea is that you're on this for like...
a tiny amount of testosterone.
The
idea...
You're
like, oh, and that might cause it, but not the Lupron that's going to block pretty much all of your
Allow me to explain. You seem confused. The idea is that
I'm really not.
Hold on, let me explain. The idea is that if somebody continuously medically transitions, yeah, that's typically going to render them infertile. Although we do have some studies on people going off of cross-sex hormones and becoming fertile again. There was a study which came out of a fertility clinic which specifically saw a group of trans women that went off their estrogen to try to regain fertility. And out of the sample of trans women they had, every single one was able to regain fertility. But just the fact that
how big was that sample?
It was a sample of 9. So obviously, like, that's a pretty small sample. But I mean, this idea that even cross-sex hormones is just going to always permanently render somebody infertile, not proven in the medical literature. But what I'm claiming is that puberty blockers alone...
because it's on the website.
What I'm claiming is that puberty blockers alone, in the overwhelming majority of cases, do not render somebody permanently infertile. And you don't have any evidence to prove otherwise.
And neither do you. You don't have any evidence to dispute the claim I had on the official website. You having one article that says that is not even... And you know what the thing is? Even if it was like as low as like 5%, or if it was like, oh, like, you know, you can't even be, it doesn't even matter. A child should not be able to take that risk. A child shouldn't be transitioning genders. Why are you acting like the percentage even matters?
So I think that ultimately this comes down to like a risk-benefit analysis. But if you would have read the article that I sent you and looked at the citation of the medical article it's referring to, it literally states... I did
read the article you sent me.
It literally states that if you're on puberty blockers...
I'm not gonna...
And you stop taking... Can I finish? If you're on puberty blockers...
false claim.
Please allow me to read from this peer-reviewed study. It claims...
Okay, then stop making false claims when I've already told you that didn't happen.
I'm reading from peer-reviewed studies, and it claims that if you're on puberty blockers and you stop taking them, your endogenous puberty will resume. That gonadal function is promptly restored, and reproductive potential appears normal in young adulthood. I have another peer-reviewed study I can give you. I have another peer-reviewed study I can give you that says in cases where puberty blockers are used, individuals must cease therapy for up to 1 year in order to resume the production of sperm. If you're only on puberty blockers and you stop taking them for just about a year, you're able to regain fertility in the overwhelming majority of cases. This is what the science shows. And you think it's completely
different when estrogen is involved?
Well, if you have estrogen involved and you're going to continually take estrogen, then that's going to continually suppress your fertility. But if you stop taking the estrogen, then you often...
Dude, you don't let me speak.
You often can become fertile again.
You just want to read every study and then be like, oh, this is fact because it's peer-reviewed. Can you have a friggin' conversation?
That's what I'm trying to do, but you're not letting me talk.
You're not, though. You're trying to talk over me. You're not trying to let me speak.
I was down to let you speak, but you seem to be very intent on talking over me.
You've talked over me like 5 times, but okay.
Have you seen this, Naomi?
Okay, and you've talked over me way more than 5 times. But if you'd like to know what happens if you continually take estrogen, yeah, it's going to render you infertile in most cases while you're taking the estrogen. And what it seems to be the case is if you go off the estrogen, then you are likely to be able to become fertile again. Although, you know, the evidence on that is still pretty limited.
So why are you messing with the fertility of children?
Well, I believe that we should give them access to fertility counseling and banking before they start on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. That way it's not really a concern.
Maybe we shouldn't be like messing with children's gender.
Or we can just like give them access to fertility banking and then follow evidence-based medical guidelines, which are shown to improve their lives.
I don't know why you're so hyper-focused on wanting kids to transition so bad. Like, it's kind of scary.
Because it improves their mental health and their overall well-being, and this is what's shown in the medical literature. You're saying that based off of
some peer-reviewed articles, which you can't even really confirm or accurate. You just say, oh, it's a legitimate website, it's a real study, so I believe it.
Well, I look at the study, and I actually read the whole study, and I understand what's going on in the data, and I take a holistic approach to science, where I think that you need to look at the entire overwhelming body of peer-reviewed evidence in tandem. Because obviously, any study you read is going to have weaknesses, it's going to have limitations. But when we find the exact same result again and again and again, study after study, with different factors, with different sample sizes, with different variables, time and time again, all point to the same study, in the systematic literature reviews, which we have systematic literature reviews spanning dozens and hundreds of studies on medical transition, and they find overwhelmingly this exact same result time and time again, that medical transition improves the lives of trans people and trans youth, then yeah, that starts to be pretty convincing.
You know, you're the type of person that's so good at using big words to like make yourself sound super smart.
So
and
I guess
like the reality is, regardless of all these BS studies, which a lot of the conclusions are based off of very little data, in my opinion, you're talking about putting children on puberty blockers and messing with their gender. To me, it seems predatory and not okay.
So I guess like what kind of data
of your statistics?
I'm asking. I guess I'm curious.
Be putting hormone blockers on children.
I'm really curious. What kind of like data or evidence would you need to see to show
I don't need data
that
or evidence to know that
something
we
is
shouldn't be
helpful?
forcing kids, or that we shouldn't be allowing children who sometimes think they're Superman or whatever their imagination thinks they are. We shouldn't be giving them the option to change genders.
Well, we can actually collect evidence on these things and see if whether or not something helps somebody.
There's no evidence to be talked about. You want to change the genders of children. That is sick. That is sick.
There is apparently the evidence is enough for the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. It seems to be enough for every major medical institution. It seems to be enough.
When I bring up associations that don't agree with you.
Let me finish. The evidence seems to be enough.
But never let me respond. You just want to talk for 15 minutes.
I will let you respond. Just allow me to finish. It seems that the evidence is enough for literally every major medical institution. So why isn't it enough for you?
Okay, so I have my info. The director of the CEBMA, which is the Belgian Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, Dr. Patrick, hard to pronounce last name, Van Kroosleven, has joined the growing list of experts criticizing the gender-affirming care approach for minors with gender dysphoria, simply because they don't think it's evidence-based. So if we go on to what they said...
You're not even listening to what I'm saying. You're just citing one single doctor. I'm not citing just one single doctor.
No, can I finish?
I'm citing the overwhelming...
If you're going to talk, let me finish now. It's because you're bringing up all your points and being like, see, scientific after peer-reviewed article, like all these things are saying the same thing. And then when I bring my peer-reviewed articles, you always have something to say, oh, that one's not accurate. It's so hypocritical, dude.
Your citation is just a single doctor talking about their opinion.
I
think that the overwhelming body of evidence matters a lot more than what one doctor says.
It's a growing list of experts. I don't have the full list here to read every doctor's name for you. Does that mean it's not right?
What like percentage of like doctors and scientists does that group make up? Because as far as I know, it is the extreme minority, and there's a reason for that. Just like the extreme minorities of doctors are anti-vax because vaccines work, the extreme minority of doctors are anti-trans because
I just feel like if you can bring up all your peer-reviewed articles, you've let me say one of my peer-reviewed articles. Like, can I bring up another one? There was another doctor, Christina Olsen.
You're just citing one doctor again.
Let me continue because it's more than one doctor. So Dr. Christina Olsen, who performed studies on trans youth, she claimed that there were minimal differences in anxiety, depression, and self-worth compared to biological children after these kids transitioned, right? So they reanalyzed this data, and it showed transgender children supported by their parents had lower than average scores on anxiety and self-worth compared to biological children. So they're claiming that this should be a warning to everyone that not to accept all research at a surface level. And unfortunately, a lot of your studies are very surface level.
So how are they surface level?
Because all the points I made in that video I posted last night, all of that. Did you watch it?
I did watch it. If I recall, the first point you had was that the first study, you didn't like that 60% was the amount to experience remission from depression, even though 60% is better than the best antidepressant on the market. And the other thing you didn't like...
Because you're comparing it to antidepressants, which isn't a good comparison at all, because those are shit too.
Okay, I know that you just don't like medicine in general, but allow me to continue. So
I know you like medicating the American public when they don't need it.
The other question you had about the study was you wanted to see what it would look like with like a longer follow-up, how the kids feel like 10 or 15 years down the line. And that's exactly why I cited the other study as well, because the other study was conducted on adults, referring to their usage of puberty blockers as children, and would have contained adults up to 25 years down the line since their treatment with puberty blockers. So that second study I cited does include long-term samples.
I found out that where they did a lot of that study was at like trans activist events Do you really think
No.
people who detransitioned are going to be there?
That study came from the Trans Survey, which also had a sample of detransitioners in it.
Okay.
That's just the facts about the Trans Survey.
Why would they be interviewing detransitioners in the first place for a study like that?
Because they want to collect data on detransitioners as well as trans people.
But the question is literally, are you happy with your transition? Obviously, detransitioners are not happy with their transition.
Right, and they said that in the study.
Okay.
And actually, if you want to look at the data on detransitioners from the trans study, it was the overwhelming majority of people who reported a detransition was not due to any internal factors like being trans was not right for them. It was overwhelmingly a temporary detransition due to external social pressures, like lacking the funding for their hormones or lacking family support or support from their friends and peers. Like once again, showing this exact same trend that, that detransition is exceptionally rare. And it's often the case due to external social pressures, not due to somebody internally realizing that they were wrong about their gender identity.
So I don't agree. I think it's kind of BS that like all of my peer-reviewed articles just aren't accurate or they're not logical, but yours all are. It's
the citations in your peer-reviewed articles is
right. There's
one
always a citation.
Hold up.
With my peer-reviewed
what your peer-reviewed articles are referring to is one doctor said this.
I didn't go through
and then what? Hold up. Let me finish.
Dude, you can only do this on. You're not a good debater. You know why? Because you can only debate on evidence that's like scientific. You can't have a talk about transgenderism in a common sense way.
I mean, we can certainly talk. Can you? I mean, we can certainly talk about trans people in the abstract sense,
like, is there
but you weren't able to hold up.
A robot that,
when we were talking about being trans in the abstract sense, you weren't really able to give me any kind of concrete reason why, for example, a kid identifying as non-binary is harmful in any way.
I gave you plenty of reasons.
Wait, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what Kelly. You're not even listening. What I said is Kelly, you're not listening to me. What I said was when we try to talk about things in the abstract. Can you listen? What did I just say?
God, dude, what did I just say?
So you were interrupting me to say that, like, you were talking about, I'm just referring to studies and evidence, and you want to have a conversation about transgenderism logically. So what did I say?
I meant after I said that part, the part when we were talking over each other. What was I saying?
I just gave you what you said. Can you tell me what I said?
No, the part that when we were, obviously that was before we started interrupting each other.
That was the part
I'll give you
that
that,
you said
though.
last.
That was good. That was slick of you.
Yeah, you don't know what I said because you weren't listening, Kelly. But please allow me to
that wasn't
actually
what I
explain.
said when we were talking over each other. I wanted to know what I said when you were talking over me.
What did you say?
Apparently you don't know.
Okay, so please allow me to explain what I was saying. And if you can listen, then we can have that conversation. So you wanted to talk about things in like the abstract sense. When we were talking about things in the abstract sense, you couldn't give me any reason why a kid identifying as non-binary is harmful, like any concrete reason.
Because we should stick to kids knowing that there's men and women because that's what most people are. We shouldn't be making a majority of the world transgender.
Why not?
Because it's not normal.
That's the ad populum fallacy.
It's a good thing? Dude, I'm transgender, and at least I can admit that this isn't like, it's not fun to be transgender. Anyone that's trans, if they're actually trans, would do anything to be born cis. Or I don't even want to say cis. A biological woman.
I disagree with that. But I guess like your entire argument, if you
enjoy being trans, you're an attention seeker.
Okay, whatever. Your entire argument is just the ad populum fallacy. This appeal to whatever is normal is like right. Is that correct?
Because man and woman are right. There are two genders. What are you talking about?
Do you believe that whatever is normal is morally right and correct?
Like the majority of people.
Okay, so if we go back like a couple hundred years, it was pretty normal to own slaves. Is that right or correct?
God, why are we talking about slavery?
Because I'm showing you why the ad populum fallacy is a logical fallacy.
Honestly, back then, a lot of Black people participated in the slave trade themselves, so...
Yeah, that doesn't make slavery right. Are you trying to defend slavery?
It was a product of the time, dude.
Are you trying to defend slavery?
Did you not see Matt Walsh's new video on this topic?
I did, and I think that defending slavery is fucking cringe as hell.
defending slavery, but I think we're illogical if we didn't realize that a lot of Black people enjoyed being slaves back when slavery was a thing.
How do you know that Black people enjoyed being slaves?
I mean, it's just in history. I've like read about like a lot of Black people not only participated in capturing slaves, but a lot of Black people enjoyed being slaves. Because of course, when you're
Really?
brought up doing something like being a slave your whole life, it's all you know. I'm sure a lot of slaves probably enjoyed it and were happy because that's the only lifestyle they were aware of.
That's crazy.
Can you not think like that? Like, is it really that dense?
I have
of you?
never
Like,
heard of somebody enjoying having to work countless hours on a plantation, being dehumanized and whipped and told that they're not human, and being beaten within an inch of their life and being raped.
I'm not saying that's
I don't think that
okay.
people
I'm just
enjoy
saying
that.
You can't deny the fact that there were probably slave owners that, just like there were really bad ones, there were probably slave owners that probably treated their slaves really nice too, right? Like, you're not thinking logically. You're being so dense.
So I'm just going to say that in general, I think it's wrong to own humans.
Of course. We're not in that time period anymore.
But you're defending slavery.
I'm not defending it. I'm saying it was a product of the time.
You said that Black people enjoyed being slaves.
I think there were probably a good majority of Black people who back then were born and raised as slaves, probably because that's the only thing they knew. It was the environment they grew up in. If they had a slave owner who treated them well, they probably enjoyed their lives, a few of them. I think it's illogical to believe that every person who was a slave back then hated their life. I truly think that's illogical. I do.
I'm pretty sure that being owned is not a good thing.
Because you grew up in this generation and this is what you've been taught. And we know these things now.
No,
but back then,
not just because
those societal standards were not created yet.
Not just because I grew up in this generation, but because I can think logically and morally on this topic and why it is unfair to own another human based off of their birth as having like a certain skin color, for example. That's unfair.
I'm pretending
and
like I'm
illogical.
saying it's okay to own slaves now, because that's not what I'm insinuating.
You are defending slavery.
I'm not defending it. I'm just giving you the facts. Aren't you all about facts over feelings?
Yeah, and I believe that slavery is immoral.
Right, and I do too. But the fact was, back then, I think you're illogical if you think that some of them didn't enjoy being slaves or enjoy their lives.
This Naomi TikTok?
Why would anyone enjoy being a slave?
That's the environment you grew up in. That's all you've ever known. So if you grew up in that environment and you have a slave owner who treats you well, that's just all they know. So they probably were happy about it. They didn't know freedom. Why is it so hard for you to understand this?
What does like a slave owner treating their slave well look like?
I mean, back then, I'm sure some of them, I'm pretty sure they fed them, right? Or probably that like they weren't whipping anybody or like not tormenting anyone. Just like, I don't have like specific details for you, dude. I'm not
So as long as they're like, as long as you're working inhumane hours on plantations, but you're being fed, then that's a good thing.
Again, I'm not saying slavery was a good thing. You're not gonna like try to make it seem like that's what I'm saying, because okay. I don't know what you want me to say. If you want to believe that every person back then who was a slave hated their life, go for it.
Okay, so I guess like I'm just trying to illustrate why the ad populum fallacy is a logical fallacy. Just because something is normal does not mean that it's morally right, for example. Do you understand why the ad populum fallacy is a logical fallacy?
I mean, I'm not saying everything that isn't normal is bad. I don't think gay people are bad. I think people are born naturally gay, and that's the majority. And I think there's a huge difference between being gay and attraction and then gender identity.
Okay, excellent. So now that you recognize that it's not a valid argument to say that being gay or being whatever is bad just because it's not normal, then why is it
most of the time?
Then why is it bad?
Especially when we make up less than like 5% of the population, whereas gay people are probably a lot more. And you're not like the difference between someone being gay versus being trans and me having the desire to have bottom surgery, like get my genitalia flipped inside out. Like, can you not see the difference in like mental sanity there?
So there's
like,
obviously
like
differences
you realize
between,
like that's different, right?
There's obviously differences between trans and gay people. So my question is, if being abnormal is not wrong, then what's wrong with being, say, trans or intersex or non-binary?
Because you know it's completely different. You're not cutting off body parts when you're gay. You're not going under the knife when you're gay. You're not changing like your pronoun and your entire identity when you're gay. It's just who you're attracted to.
Okay, so what's wrong with changing your pronoun?
Oh my God, because the majority of people should not be wanting to live this lifestyle. You're advocating
Why
for a
not?
life that isn't that great.
What's wrong with changing
And you
your,
want
like,
to
why
put
is
that
it
on
wrong to
not only
change your
on adults,
pronoun?
you're pushing that on children.
I'm not trying to push anything. I'm trying to say that people should be allowed to access this care and people should be allowed to express themselves. That's not the same thing
You
as trying
make
to push
videos on
something.
TikTok, dude. Who do you think the majority of the audience is on there that's seeing that? Probably kids.
From what I've seen with my community is mostly people who are in like the 18 to 24 age range. But
regardless, kids are going to see your content.
What I'm still asking you is, like, what makes it wrong to identify with another pronoun? And we've already established by saying it's not normal is a logical
because
fallacy.
There's a man and a woman. There's men and women. It's he, him, or she, her. That's the reality.
What's wrong with using a different pronoun?
Because it doesn't exist, and you're teaching children something that's false.
What? You don't think that they, them's pronouns exist?
I think they exist when you say, like, they're over there, like, they, or anytime, you know, but, like, it's only when you don't know their preferred pronouns, you know, or you don't know that person.
Or if you, like, know that they're non-binary.
If I know that they were non-binary, I probably just would go out of my way to not associate with them.
And look at that, you just called them.
I mean, right, because I don't know if it's a man or a woman biologically in this case that we're talking about.
Well, they're non-binary. I don't think that pronouns.
I use they them when I don't know
pronouns
a person's gender.
I don't think that pronouns just refer to somebody's biology. Like if you call someone she, her, that doesn't mean that somebody has XX chromosomes.
Because we have a very small portion of the community who identifies as trans, and you're trying to push it on kids and trying to make it so a majority, or not even a majority, just like a good portion of the world is trans. I think even 15% or like something like that is crazy. It should be the way it's always been, which is less than 2% of the population is transgender.
Hold up. If you think that pronouns refer to biology, right?
No, I think that pronouns can go toward gender if you're going out of your way to present that way. For example, me, I go out of my way to fit into the female binary. So most people are going to refer to me as she, her, because that's what they see.
So do pronouns refer to social presentation then?
Absolutely. But I don't think non-binary people are valid.
Why not?
Because there's man and woman.
So do you think that non-binary is a biological category or like a psychological or cultural category?
I think it's an attention-seeking category, a trend, if anything.
You think it's a trend? Then why have there been like non-binary gender identities throughout all of human histories across various cultures? Like the Hijra people in India, for example, or like the Two-Spirit populations of various Native American tribes. Third gender identities were super common across plenty of cultures throughout all of human history. It's not just a trend.
That doesn't mean they were valid.
What makes it valid then?
If you're born with, can I say penis? If you're born with a penis or a vagina.
That's what makes a gender identity valid? A penis or vagina?
That means you're either a man or a woman. Absolutely. And then there's a very small portion of the population that has body dysmorphia and will do anything to go out of their way to present as the other gender and be seen that way. That's what a true transgender person is.
Okay, I just like don't see how we keep on flip-flopping between like pronouns are a construct of society versus pronouns are a construct of biology. Like you keep on flip-flopping on those.
Because I don't think pronouns should even be a topic of discussion. If you're trans, you need to earn your way to get that pronoun. I earned my way to get here and to look like this and to have people see me and see she, her without me having to say it.
Why should you have to earn your pronouns?
Because we're a very small portion of society. I don't know why this is so crazy to you. You realize we're not like logical technically. Like I mean, not you personally. I don't know what surgeries you've had.
I mean, I'm perfectly logical.
That we transitioned. I mean, I love who I am, but like, I'm not a biological woman. And like to the majority of people, I can see how that would be crazy to them, that I would get my private parts inverted. I love it. But like, I'm probably a little crazy too. Like, why would I want to do that? I don't know. Maybe it's like a birth defect. People get really offended when I say that, but that just seems like the only logical thing to me is that it's a birth defect.
I mean, I don't think that you're crazy because you're trans. I think you're crazy for other reasons, like the whole slavery stuff.
Oh my God, because I've literally, I don't have like the exact source for you, but I remember like reading things that said not every person who was a slave hated their life and some people enjoyed it. That's all I meant, and that was just because that was the environment they grew up in. I wasn't saying
I know that Ron
good.
DeSantis
and
told you
you're
that,
trying to
but
paint me that way because I'm not a racist person.
I didn't say that you were a racist person. I said that you were defending slavery. I know that Ron DeSantis.
Slavery. I did not.
I know that Ron DeSantis told you that like
said it was okay. I said it was a product of the time.
Okay, I know that Ron DeSantis told you that like black people love being slaves or whatever, but from what I understand,
anything on him.
From what I
don't
understood,
know anything about what he stands for.
Okay,
I don't know. People
I mean,
are like, "Oh,
you
so
go
in
to
Florida
you live in Florida, right? You live in Florida, right?
I am in Florida for the time being.
Yeah, and Florida is like the center of like curriculum-based censorship, particularly surrounding like the history of race in this country. So like that makes a lot of sense.
You know, people down here are really nice. I haven't had any issues down here as a transgender woman.
That has nothing to do with what I just said.
I've been down here for like 2+ years.
Well, that's great for you, but that has nothing to do with what I said.
Because you're acting like Florida is like this toxic place for trans people. Why? Because they don't want minors to transition. They don't want minors on pharmaceuticals.
I think that Florida is a toxic place for humans because they're trying to deny the reality of history by not teaching about like slavery or racism.
I mean, I don't know about that topic. I didn't know they aren't teaching about slavery anymore.
There was like an addendum in the Florida educational curriculum where they had to remove any reference to race from the Rosa Parks story, for example, because mentioning her race at all would have made the story too woke and would violate Florida's Stop Woke Act. So the way that the story reads now in like Florida curriculum is that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to somebody who asked her to give up her seat, and she was a hero, and that's it. They can't reference race at all. That seems like a disastrous miseducation and denial of history.
I mean, yeah, I didn't know that. I don't really know why that has much to do with what we're talking about. But
I brought that up because you live in Florida, and your understanding of like racism and slavery seems deeply flawed, which would make sense given like the pushes to ban educational curriculum on like the history of race in this country in Florida.
Because I brought up a factoid that a lot of people believe to be true.
You can keep telling yourself that.
So just because it wasn't written in the history books, that means it wasn't true.
It's not what I said.
Well, it's what you're insinuating, right?
No. What I'm insinuating is that being owned is a bad thing.
No one said it wasn't. Why are you trying to... See, when you say stuff like that, you're trying to make it seem like I'm agreeing. Like I'm saying like the opposite.
Well, you can tell me that like owning humans is a bad thing and like people don't enjoy being owned, but you seem to say that there were certain people who were like they loved being slaves, they loved being owned by other humans.
Then,
okay,
that's all they knew. It was the environment they grew up in. That's human nature. Do you not understand that?
So what if like humans grew up in an environment where it was normal to recognize a third gender population, such as the Hijra over in India? Is that okay now?
Where they grew up to what?
To recognize a third or non-binary gender identity, such as the Hijra people of India.
I mean, I just feel like in reality, there's no way to even think about that logically because there's just no third genitalia. There's penises and vaginas. So what is non-binary? Just someone with a penis or a vagina who says they're non-binary and has they, them pronouns?
Non-binary is not a biological sex. It's a gender identity. A gender identity is a self-perception in relation to the cultural and sociological categories we create surrounding gender. And
so what is non-binary?
In modern westernized societies, we would typically have this
non-binary then? What are you?
What is non-binary? Non-binary refers to a gender identity or a self-perception which doesn't fully align. What is that gender
identity?
I'm trying to explain it to you. That doesn't fully align in terms of man and or woman.
Okay, so a tomboy or a tomgirl, right?
No, gender expression is different than gender identity.
So pretty much in your guys' world, tomboy and tomgirl doesn't exist anymore, and you're just not binary.
No, not at all. Because a tomboy would be somebody who identifies as a girl, but they express their gender in a more masculine way. And a femboy would be somebody who identifies as a boy, but expresses his gender in a more feminine way. Meanwhile, a non-binary person would be somebody who identifies as neither a man nor a woman, and then they can express their gender however they like.
Great, but they're still just a man or a woman.
Are you talking biologically or sociologically?
Both.
Well, I mean, obviously,
No one else in society is going to see them that way. No one else, even the people that are woke, do not see them that way. They just say they do. You realize that, right?
I mean, I'm woke, and I see non-binary people as non-binary. I legitimately see them that way. So I don't know why you're trying to speak for me on that matter. But, I mean, obviously, a non-binary person is going to have a biological sex, and obviously, the way in which they move through society, people are probably going to perceive them in kind of one gender category or the other. That's how things are. But they can still have a different gender identity or a different self-perception, a different sincere identity.
And what does that mean besides a pronoun change and a change of clothing?
It's a self-perception, just like I said.
And what is that and that's it?
Yeah, so a gender identity is a sincere self-perception.
Self-perception is a new gender identity.
That's what identity is, yeah.
So disrespectful to people like me who are like actually trans.
Well, I mean,
that's just like taking the title for the fun of it.
I'm actually trans, and I don't see it as disrespectful at all. Because my identity does not depend on whether or not other people are going to validate it. So, like, it really doesn't offend me either way.
I mean, if it didn't matter, why would you change your pronouns in the first place?
Well, I mean, I would prefer it if people called me by she, they pronouns, but obviously they don't have to. And
what's the point
that's just
of
what
that?
I prefer.
If people can call you she, her, what is the point of they, them?
I also enjoy being called by they, them pronouns. That's fine.
It just seems like nonsense to me. I don't know.
Why is it nonsense?
Because I made an actual transition. I don't have to tell people I'm trans for them to call me she, her. So there's not one single non-binary person who's going to be able to be like, oh, they're non-binary without having to tell them, unless you're super woke like yourself and you perceive non-binary people a certain way.
Have you not seen any androgynous person where you're like, I'm not sure if they're a boy or a girl?
If they're androgynous, I usually can tell if they're a man or a woman.
But have you ever seen anybody that you couldn't tell?
You usually can tell most of the time, unless they're on HRT, which in my opinion, if you're a non-binary person going on HRT, you're either confused or you're actually trans and you think you're non-binary.
Okay, so that doesn't answer my question. My question is, have you ever seen somebody that you're really unsure of what their gender is?
No, I can always tell what they're biologically. I mean, gender, I don't know because I don't believe in their gender.
You can always tell what they are biologically?
Biological sex, for sure.
Okay, this test has been run so many times, and that's just not true. You cannot always tell.
Oh, you definitely can't. If there's no HRT involved, oh, you 100% can.
You can tell 100% of the time?
If there's no HRT, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. Do you know who Finster is by chance?
That is so true.
Do you know who Finster is by chance?
Amazing. Where's the transition then? How are they becoming anything different besides clothing and a pronoun at that point?
So you can do other forms of expression which are gendered, things like mannerisms, hair, other things in addition to like clothing and pronouns. But I have definitely seen some people who are very much androgynous where you really can't tell. I've also definitely seen cis boys that I would have clocked as girls and cis women who I would have clocked as boys. This idea that we can always tell what your biological sex is just ludicrous.
Does that happen to you a lot? You must have some crazy people in your life.
Well, I mean, I interact with fun people, so maybe the people over here are just way more fun in their gender expression.
No, I interact with sane people.
Okay. Do you think that I'm really trans, Kelly?
If you're using a she, they pronoun, I don't. I don't think you're really trans.
You don't think that I'm really trans? Why am I not really trans?
I mean, first of all, I don't even think people who are non-binary are transgender at all, because regardless of if I believe non-binary is valid or not, non-binary is non-binary. You're not transgender. It's a different thing. Why are you calling it the same thing if it's different?
Okay, what's the definition of, like, what's the common definition of transgender? Or how do you define transgender?
To me, transgender is what I said earlier. It's someone who's born, if we're talking trans woman, who is born biologically a man, who goes out of their way to go on HRT and hormones and get surgeries in order to emulate the look of a woman and be a woman in society, or be seen as one.
That sounds like the term transsexual.
As far as I'm concerned, I was told that was an outdated term. I don't even know anymore because it's changed a lot.
I'm all for reclaiming the term transsexual. I think that there are some contexts where it can be useful to distinguish transgender from transsexual, particularly if you're talking about like a medical context, for example. But the common definition of transgender just refers to somebody who identifies with a gender other than the one they were assigned at birth. And most people aren't assigned non-binary at birth. So if somebody identifies as non-binary, then they would be identifying with a gender other than the one that they were assigned at birth. And they would be categorically transgender.
I don't think they're really trans. I think transgender is a very specific thing, and I truly mean that.
So
I
so
don't think you're the same thing as me.
You don't think that I'm transgender, but I take hormones.
I don't think you're transgender.
I take hormones.
You have a decent following, right? You have like a decent amount of money. Have you not gotten a lot of surgery? Have you had any work done at all?
I haven't had surgeries because I don't need surgeries to be pretty.
So you don't feel gender dysphoria?
I do experience gender dysphoria. I just don't feel like I need surgeries to be pretty.
It's not about being pretty. It's to cure your dysphoria.
Well, just taking hormones has cured my dysphoria, so I'm feeling pretty great about myself.
See, I'm not even trying to like insult you. Like it's the same thing for me.
You did say that I'm not truly transgender.
I'm going out of my way to want to pass really badly. Is that not something you desire at all?
I mean, I do pass in my everyday life, and that's a good thing. I enjoy that. However, I don't see how you can say that I'm not truly transgender. And you're trying to say that you're not insulting me, but you're literally saying that I'm not transgender. I have never once tried to invalidate your identity.
You don't even identify as transgender. You identify as non-binary. So, like, I don't know why it has to be in the same category.
I identify as transgender and transsexual and non-binary. These identities can all overlap. I identify as all of the above.
And you say you're logical for saying that.
Because those are not contradictory identities in any way.
Yes, all of them are just lies. It's a fantasy.
So wait, how is it a contradiction to be transgender, transsexual, and non-binary under the definitions which I'm using?
Because if we're calling transsexual to describe exactly what I am, I think transsexual is the only thing that's legitimate then. If you want to go by that. You didn't answer my question.
I said under my set of definitions, how is it illogical to simultaneously be transgender, transsexual, and non-binary?
I mean, I thought that answered the question because transsexual is the only thing that's legitimate. Non-binary doesn't exist. It's made up.
So you're not actually answering my question. I said under my set of definitions, and then you're saying I reject your set of definitions. That doesn't
under your set of definitions
follow from my
set
of definitions. Yeah.
I mean, I guess by your definitions, it's not illogical. I'll give you that one.
Yeah, so it's logically consistent.
But it's not though, because in general, all those things are illogical.
I mean, I'm using the common definitions of all of these terms. You're the one that's using a non-standard.
We put a lot of.
You're the one that's using a very non-standard definition of transgender, but I'm using just the common definition of transgender.
Because you're taking like people knew what it was to be like pre-2010. I am what it meant to be transgender. Now it's completely something else.
Okay, so wait, hold up. Do you think that I'm not transsexual?
If you have the money to get bottom surgery, which I'm assuming you do, and you decide not to, I don't think you're transsexual.
Why does a transsexual person need to get bottom surgery to be transsexual?
Because a trans person needs gender dysphoria to be trans. And if you have true gender dysphoria, you would do anything to get that surgery.
What if your gender dysphoria...
I think real trans women know that.
What if your gender dysphoria is about other sex characteristics, like the kind of things that hormones change, but not really about your genitals? Or, for example, you could be somebody who's very happy with how estrogen feminizes the penis. I mean, we all love the feminine penis, right?
And you think that's normal. You think that's okay.
I never said it's normal. Obviously, trans people make up, like, what, 1-2% of the population? But, I mean, hey, power to my gawk girlies.
I need mental health. Why would a person be like that? You think that's sane?
Yeah, girl clock is awesome.
It's not. It's not. Just because it's a fetish category and you make a lot of money.
I'm not saying it's a fetish category. I'm saying that.
I mean, it is.
I mean, I think that the mouthfeel of the feminine penis is better. Like the mouthfeel, like it's softer.
Did you want me to like act grossed out or something?
I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, I think you're trying to say something weird to get a rise out of me because you know it sounds weird.
Okay. Well,
like,
I'm just trying to get an idea of like why you think it's wrong to be like happy as a transsexual girly or a transsexual Enby with a feminine penis.
Because they're not happy.
I'm pretty happy. I'm very happy.
Okay. Let's see where you are in 20 years.
Happy.
Sure.
So like,
I just feel like at this point I truly feel like you have so much pressure on yourself, or maybe not now, because you probably still actually believe like what you preach, but there's going to come a point where you're going to realize like the reality and that this is kind of all BS.
I mean, if it's all BS, then like why am I extremely happy with my transition? Like I accept the reality. The reality is that medical transition and social transition have all been awesome and wonderful for me, and I am happy living my life as a transgender, transsexual, non-binary person, and I love it.
And you can sleep at night knowing you're promoting hormones to kids, and that a lot of these detransition videos and future detransition videos could potentially partly be because of your misinformation that you spread on your platform.
Well, I mean, I want trans kids to survive to the age of 18, and I also want to provide the specialized care for detransitioners who need that. Also, just to be clear, this way that you try to enforce a gender binary and a sex binary, which absolutely harms intersex people, which absolutely harms detransitioners.
No, it doesn't.
This worldview that you're purporting, that people have to conform to a binary sex and a binary gender, that hurts intersex and detransitioners who they end up with kind of like mixed sex characteristics. Like your worldviews actually hurt intersex and detransitioners. But my worldview of we should accept people given diverse gender expression, diverse gender identities, and diverse sex characteristics, that helps detransitioners and intersex people to be able to live better lives in this society, in a more accepting, welcoming society towards all bodies.
So I know that you have a lot of woke friends because you're super left. So I know you have intersex friends that probably agree with you. And I don't know any personally, but from what I've seen on TikTok, because my For You page is probably a little different from yours, and some stuff I've seen on Reddit, a lot of intersex people don't like the community and actually get the surgery and do try to conform, because a majority of intersex people, at least from what I've read, seem like they want to conform and be normal and fit in the binary.
Well, if that's what an intersex person wishes to do, then I think that they should absolutely be allowed to access that care and treatment. But I also think that if an intersex person is happy with their mixed sex characteristic body and they enjoy being who they are just naturally, then they should also be allowed to exist as they are without any kind of pressure to conform to a binary sex or gender.
Oh, I agree with that. But that's because they're born that way. They were born that way. They didn't ask for it.
Okay. So
wait,
hold up.
It's
just
different than
question.
Trans people who are not even real trans people, non-binary people, are just like, that's not something you were born with.
Yeah, so what? It doesn't really matter if you were born one way or the other.
To me, it does.
Why does that matter?
Because that's the reality of what you are.
Right, I recognize that there are differences between people who are like born a certain way versus people who like transition to be a certain way, but like, why is one like right and the other wrong?
Because I'm not saying my way is 100% right. I recognize that being transgender is a borderline mental illness, but I feel like a cure to that is transitioning and trying to pass. So to me, I don't like to promote transitioning to children, or honestly even to adults, because this isn't an easy life. Like not everyone's going to have an opportunity to pass, you know, like this is just, it's not the easiest road to take. I think people are,
it's obviously going to be a lot.
I need to stop saying that word, when they're biological and they stay their biological sex.
It's obviously going to be a lot harder for people to pass if you force them to wait until they're 18. But if we were able to develop better diagnostic criteria where we can accurately identify who would benefit from a medical transition and allow them access to puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones based off of evidence-based medical guidelines, then it'd be a lot easier for those people to pass, because they would no longer have to undergo their natal puberty and be forced to undergo those permanent, irreversible changes which puberty creates.
Right, but those are naturally occurring changes for their biological sex puberty, right?
I mean, just because something is naturally occurring doesn't mean it's a good thing.
The decision to give themselves the opposite sex's hormones.
Wait, do you think that just because something is
not a naturally occurring thing, a child should not be able to make that decision?
Do you think that just because something is naturally occurring, that means it's a good thing?
I think a majority of the time, yes.
Okay, so then that's not a justification, because that's the appeal to nature fallacy. So just because something that being natural is and it's good like a majority of the time, doesn't mean that just because something is natural or unnatural, it's good or bad or right or wrong. So you would need to provide like an actual justification why.
I really don't, because I think the majority of people recognize what I'm saying.
Well, again,
it's common.
Now you're once again using
the
ad populum fallacy. What is common sense is a logical fallacy. What is natural is a logical fallacy.
The majority
all
of
your
people
arguments,
should stay
Kelly,
as they naturally are.
Kelly, all of your
That's
arguments,
the reality.
all of your arguments are just classic, well-known logical fallacies.
The majority of people should not be transitioning their sex because it's not logical. It's a very life, and it's not like something that really cures a lot of like your dysphoria in the first place for a lot of people.
You literally conceded that under my worldview, it's completely logical.
But your worldview is not logical to me.
Why is my worldview illogical?
Because you're living in a fantasy world.
What's my fantasy?
Your fantasy is that you think that you're non-binary, that you're not just a biological man, I'm assuming, who, I don't know if you're on female hormones or if you just cross-dress. I really don't know the details of your transition, but to me, you aren't taking the necessary steps to do the same thing I did, which is to try to pass in society and to not harm children.
Okay, so hold up. First off, I do completely pass in every way in my everyday life. So like I literally, if that's the bar that you're trying to set, like I literally meet that bar, but that doesn't explain like why my worldview is like illogical in any way. You're trying to explain why my worldview is illogical. Like what's the what's the fantasy? You say that like my non-binary identity is like a wait, hold up. You say that my non-binary identity is like a confusion about my biology, when I literally told you that non-binary is a gender identity, not a biological sex, and it doesn't say anything intrinsically about somebody's biological sex.
Because you're making your gender identity as just being a tomboy or tomgirl in reality.
That's not what a gender identity is. That's talking about like a gender expression.
It literally is, because you're telling me you're something in between man and woman, and like you're not like in the binary. So you're a tomboy or a tomgirl, and you're just using it as an identity when that's not what it is. It's just your personality.
I think you're conflating expression with identity. But I guess like what's the fantasy or the falsehood that like I believe?
That you're non-binary.
How is that a falsehood?
Because it's not real.
Non-binary people aren't real?
They are. Non-binary people
how can you prove that non-binary people aren't real? I mean, this is a phenomenon which is observed by sociologists, by anthropologists studying human cultures across all of human history. This idea that gender identity can be fluid and exists along a spectrum is well established by the sociological and anthropological research communities. So I don't know how you know better. I don't know how you know better than the anthropological and psychological, sociological research.
It's just, I mean, you can call it sociological research. Just because a bunch of crazy people come together and say that something's so doesn't mean it is. And just because some researchers study those crazy people and say it's legitimate doesn't mean it is.
I mean, you do know that like gender is like a construct created by society, right?
Correct, but not sex. And I think a lot of the things
about
gender come from biology.
I'm not
like
saying
women
that
being more emotional is because of estrogen. Men being stronger is because of testosterone. These characteristics didn't come out of nowhere.
Right, I never said that. But what I'm saying is that this idea of like creating gendered categories really depends on the society in which we've lived. And all throughout human history, there have been plenty of societies which have constructed different gendered categories, not just a binary. So how were they wrong?
Because they just don't exist. In my opinion, you're born with a penis or a vagina. If you have a vagina, you're a woman. If you have a penis, you're a man. And there's a very small portion of the population.
But we're not talking about biological sex. We're talking about gender.
I'm talking about what I think is real. I don't think there's anything else other than this when it comes to transgender. Your identity does not exist to me. It's made up.
Okay. So like, I guess like you just keep on falling back into like a biological sex categorization to say that like gender is binary. We've already established there's a difference between gender and sex. So what if a society has a different construction of gender,
but not really,
and they recognize at least 3 different genders, like socially and culturally? How is that wrong?
Different genders, genitalia. What genitalia?
I didn't say that it had anything to do with genitalia. I said it's a social and cultural distinction,
you
not a biological
one. You need to have a different genitalia to be a different gender. You absolutely do.
Why? Why is gender based off of genitalia? I thought you said that there's a difference between sex and gender.
How are you even asking me that question? Like, that's when I say it comes back to common sense.
That's just your feelings. You just feel
it's
that
not
like
my feelings,
gender should
dude.
be based
The
off of
reality is
genitalia.
you're born with a penis or a vagina. No matter what
Hold up.
hormones you inject
I
into your body,
acknowledge.
you still
I
are what you are
acknowledge.
biologically. You're not anything
Hold
in
up,
between.
Kelly.
You're not one or the other.
Kelly,
you're what you're born
Kelly,
as.
you are conflating sex and gender once again. I acknowledge that people are born.
The majority of the time, sex and gender are pretty much behind.
I acknowledge that people are born with certain biological sex characteristics, and I acknowledge that in this society, you know, like 99% of the time, that's going to align with their gender identity, and it's going to align for the most part with their gender expression. But my question to you is, imagine we had a different society or a different culture where they have a different construction of gender, and it doesn't have to do with the genitals that people have. How is that invalid?
Because it's just not true. It's just not real.
This has been a real.
Go into that society, regardless of what people say their pronouns are or their identity is, people are going to say, "Oh, there's people with penises and there's people with vaginas. There's man and woman." Regardless of whatever identity you want to claim for your gender, that's the reality. And I know that's biological sex, but to me, 95% of the way they're connected.
You're not even engaging. You're not even engaging with the hypothetical. So the hypothetical is, suppose we had a society.
If anyone goes into a society and sees that there are people that identify with all these identities, you're still going to see people that have the genitals they have and know that there's two.
Yes, I do know that even in a society where the gender categories they created did not have anything to do with the genitals that people were born with, there's still going to be people with penises and people with vaginas, and rarely some people that have ambiguous genitalia. But my question to you is, if that society constructed their gender categories not around the genitalia people have, but around some other thing, perhaps like a social distinction, what's wrong with that? Because this has been a true fact, which has been observed throughout plenty of human cultures, throughout all of human history.
I just don't think it's logical. What is that even, like, you're not changing anything. Just because someone says, I'm non-binary, aren't going to look at you any differently. You're not going to even look, especially if they're in, like, this from a long time ago with societies that don't even have, like, access to hormones or something. You can't even, like, tell.
Right. Like, I'm saying that it's not a biological distinction.
To me, it really feels like you like the non-binary community, it feels like you guys are trying to corrupt society. It feels like you're trying to create a society like that, which is why people are so annoyed that you guys are going after the children.
Wait,
you're going after the youth to try to normalize something to make a genderless society.
Kelly, your entire point
don't want that.
Your entire point has just been that, like, genitals exist, which I have never once denied. My question is, like, why are these cultures?
I don't think that gender and sex should be separated. These
cultures recognize that genitals exist, but they also
the cultures that you're referencing are wrong, because the majority of cultures recognize man and woman, right? The majority.
So you think that the native populations that recognize two-spirit people were wrong? They're just wrong?
Yeah, that tells me even more that they were wrong.
Why does that make them? Why are they wrong?
Because they believe in spirits and shit. Like, come on, dude. Like, the majority of societies that have been created in history have had two genders. I'm not saying there might not have been a few outliers, but let's keep it real about the majority. And it's a strong majority.
So you just think that, like, Native American people were wrong?
When it comes to gender, if they believed in a third gender, absolutely.
But you you can't disprove that they believed anything that was, like, factually incorrect about, like, gender or sex. Because even though they recognize two-spirit people, they still recognize that two-spirit people had, like, a certain set of genitals. Like, they did recognize that.
You have to understand that your sex and gender are really connected, like, 95% of the way. People that are men are born male. People that are women are born female. It is a very small case that people are like me that are born biologically male but want to transition their gender socially to female. And it shouldn't go any farther than that. You guys are turning this society to be genderless. And I think that's so bad.
I really don't think
no one wants that.
I really don't think we're turning the society genderless. I mean, even the most liberal estimates of, like, the amount of trans people, including non-binary people, is like 2%. That doesn't erase, like, the 99 or 98% of people that are cisgender. That really, I mean, if people want to be non-binary, like, power to them. I don't see anything wrong with that. Like, I don't see why it's wrong to identify that way or to express yourself that way.
That are non-binary, saying they don't think gender should exist and they think everyone should identify that way. How do you explain those people?
I mean, they're allowed to have that opinion, like, just like how you're allowed to have that opinion. But in general, non-binary people are pretty happy allowing people to express their gender and identify their gender how they would like?
To me, it's just living in a fantasy world. I really don't know what else to tell you. There's
Well, like,
man
if
and
I acknowledge the biological reality, what's the fantasy?
The fantasy is that your gender could be anything else besides man or woman.
So, what are you saying that because of like biological reasons? Or are you saying that because of like sociological and cultural reasons?
I mean, both to a degree.
Do you think that one's like gender needs to coincide with their biological sex?
Yeah, honestly.
You know, like
I mean,
even basic biology textbooks disagree with you
there.
there.
2% of the population, and you're part of that rare case scenario that actually is transgender, then yeah, I think like 99% of the time it does.
I didn't say like in the 99%. Obviously, I agree. Then like around 99%, people's gender is going to correspond or correlate with their biological sex. But you seem to accept that, yeah, there can be people whose gender differs from their biological sex, but then you keep falling back on, no, well, it has to be biological sex. Like you have these contradictory worldviews where you have to conflate sex and gender while also saying that you don't think that sex and gender are the same thing. Like, I don't get why you have to like keep flip-flopping on conflating sex and gender and not conflating sex and gender. Like, you just keep on flip-flopping whenever it's convenient.
Can I explain? Because there's very few examples of like things that are different. For example, like what it means to be a boy, a gender thing is like liking blue, or a girl thing is like liking pink. Those are like the subtle little examples where yes, that's not always black and white. But a majority of the things that are stereotypes about man and woman did not come from nowhere. It's just a part of biology, normal, natural biology.
I think that most gendered characteristics
Have you seen this, Naomi?
Aren't really like I think that there's a degree of arbitrary in most gendered characteristics. Like obviously the colors, like you mentioned, like who wears their hair long versus who wears their hair short, like who should wear dresses versus who should wear shirts or pants or skirts. Who it's considered okay to cry, for example. All of these different gendered characteristics absolutely have a degree of arbitrary.
Man, or you can be a masculine woman, but that doesn't mean you're non-binary or trans.
Right. I've never said that gender expression is the same thing as gender identity.
Okay.
That you're talking about like gender expression there. That's not gender identity.
I mean, at your point, the only transition a non-binary person makes could be like expression, right? Like what else could they do?
Well, it'd be based on an identity, and they might want to express that a different way, but like really it doesn't matter.
And what identity are they basing it off of if it's not man or woman? It's just something in between man and woman?
It could be
because
in between.
There's only two genders,
it could be
men
kind
and women.
Of neither. In some cases it could be a little bit of both. It really depends. Non-binary is definitely like an umbrella term.
It's an illogical term.
You think that it's illogical. Here's the thing. You're going to say that's illogical because of like biological reasons. But if we're talking about biology, I mean, intersex people show that even biological sex does not fit into a clean and consistent binary.
I hate that comparison because intersex people are not non-binary.
And there are plenty of intersex people who are non-binary. Those are categories that can overlap.
But like,
so actually, let me ask you this question.
Constantly compare yourself to an intersex person.
My question to you is, if you think that like genders have to be determined by like somebody's biological sex, then would it be valid for an intersex person to identify as non-binary?
No, I think most non-binary or most intersex people want to transition to one gender or another. Hasn't it? I feel like I remember reading in school that statistically, usually they have more of one hormone that like goes towards a certain gender, and that's usually the one they end up going with. Is that not the majority of time?
It really depends. I'm not sure like what the most cases are. Obviously, because like biological sex characteristics are going to exist along a spectrum, you're probably going to lean slightly in like one direction or the other. But I guess my question to you is, say we have somebody who's like very, very much in the middle. What's wrong if they identified as non-binary?
To me, they're their biological sex, but they just either have a feminine or a more masculine personality, or they're in between. To me, you're still your biological sex. That's just personality.
Do you, I guess, do you just like disagree with the concept of identity in general? Like, do you know what a psychological or like a psychosocial identity is?
I don't like agree with like even like all these identity things. Like to me, it's either you're a man or a woman, or you're transitioned to try to be like the other.
I'm not just talking about like gender identity. I'm talking about identities in general. Like somebody could have an identity as a Christian, or somebody could have an identity as a sports fan, or somebody could have an identity as a gamer, or somebody could have an identity as a goth. Like, what do those identities mean?
They're personality traits.
I would say they definitely go beyond just like a personality trait. I think it has to also do with this sincere self-perception. There's a difference between a personality trait and a self-perception.
Liking a sport is not a personality trait.
I don't think it's just a personality trait. I think there's something going on in their brain, which is more than just like a personality trait.
I disagree with you. I think it's just a personality trait.
Being like a sports fan is just a personality trait. I think it comes with a lot of like beliefs. It comes with a lot of like a way you see yourself even.
Okay, I don't see how, like, what's your point here?
So an identity has to do with a sincere self-perception. And so an identity as a sports fan involves a sincere self-perception of, say, liking a certain sports team. An identity as a gamer involves a sincere self-perception of being one who plays and enjoys video games. And then like a gender identity would be a sincere self-expression of being a man, a woman, or maybe non-binary or somewhere in between.
You're not going to be able to convince me that liking video games is like the same thing as like gender identity.
Never said that it was the same thing. I'm saying it's like a different type of identity, but their identities
nonetheless.
See,
you keep making these really weird comparisons though to like prove your point.
Do you understand what like an analogy is?
Yeah, but your analogies are off, like especially that cancer one. Like that's just, imagine all the people hearing that have like been diagnosed with cancer or that are survivors. That's just so disrespectful.
How is that disrespectful?
Because they're cancer survivors. Like it's not the same thing as being transgender.
I never said it was the same thing as being transgender. And what I said is that people.
But you made the
and what I said is that people who are diagnosed
right?
with cancer should receive treatment. I'm saying that they should get the care they need. How is that disrespectful?
Disrespectful because people that have cancer need that treatment. Your little peer-reviewed studies are not like the same thing as cancer.
I never said that
gender dysphoria. There are some studies that show transgender gender care is medically necessary.
I never said that gender dysphoria was the same thing as cancer. Can you stop like mischaracterizing my position?
People are going to assume that when you make that comparison.
Well, it's not my job to make sure that they don't assume things incorrectly about me. I mean,
it's your job.
What I'm
You're
saying,
a content creator.
What I'm saying, I'm trying to explain myself.
What do you mean it's not your job?
I'm trying to explain myself, and what I'm explaining is that obviously there are differences between cancer and gender dysphoria. But my general moral belief in reducing harm and suffering holds in the sense that we should provide cancer treatment for cancer patients following evidence-based medical guidelines, and my belief in reducing harm and suffering holds that we should provide gender-affirming treatment for people that have gender dysphoria.
But you don't care about the hurt and suffering of all those kids that are going to end up detransitioning.
I do care about detransitioners, and that's why I want more research and data and better diagnostic criteria, and for detransitioners to be able to access the specialized care which they need. I care about detransitioners, and I'm trying to bring about the world where we can actually conduct this research so that we can provide the best medical care we can for trans people, for non-binary people, for intersex people, for detransitioners. I want them all to have the best, most specialized medical care that we can provide. And we need to be able to do research in order to get to that world. And I mean, if you want to talk about policies, such as like prospectively enrolling anybody who's a minor who receives medical transition in like a long-term prospective research study, I mean, I'm down for something like that. I would love to collect more research on the subject. But your idea of banning this is not going to, your idea of just banning this all is not going to allow us to collect that research. And you're going to be harming the 99% of trans people who are happy and satisfied with their transition only to mitigate the potential regrets of the 1%.
Why are you using that statistic again in such a manipulative way? Because you know that statistic is of people who have had bottom surgery.
There are also studies on just general trans populations, including those who haven't had bottom surgery, and the detransition rate seems to be about 1% there as well.
The difference is a lot of trans people who aren't getting surgery are non-binary, and they're not real transgender people.
Well, they also seem to not regret their transition.
Oh my God. Yeah, because they're on hormones and they've been that way for so many years. Do you not think that like giving hormones to kids, even if they genuinely think they're trans, do you not think that like they could have grown out of it if they weren't put on those hormones? but then because they were, they started to like even more feel like the other gender. You don't think that's like
the studies show that they are extremely unlikely to grow out of it. Even the studies we have on trans kids.
Well, that wasn't my question. My question was, do you think that they would grow out of it and be happier if they just grew out of it instead of going
probably
on
not.
HRT?
What the studies show overwhelmingly is that they don't grow out of it and they're happy with transitioning.
I just love how you care so much about detransitioners, but you don't care about kids in general.
I do
like if
care
you
about
started
kids.
there, we probably wouldn't have as many kids detransitioning. You probably wouldn't have to deal with that if you cared about kids.
I absolutely do care about kids. And I want trans kids to be able to make it
you
to
want
18.
It's borderline abuse.
How is it abuse?
You're putting drugs in a child to change their gender. I think it's quite simple, like what the problem is with that.
How is that a problem?
Because it's a child.
Uh-huh.
They can't know what gender they are.
We put drugs in children to treat a lot of physical and or mental health conditions.
Not gender-changing drugs. You're very aware that it's
help
different.
The child, then
you're very aware that it's completely different.
I don't think it's like I don't think it's just something that's entirely separate from any other field of medicine.
A 14-year-old girl going on birth control is not the same thing as a 14-year-old girl going on testosterone. Are you really trying to make that
obviously
comparison?
those are different like medical conditions which are going to have different treatments and different outcomes.
Different permanent effects too.
Yeah. All medicine has like side effects and stuff.
What's the difference in side effects between being on birth control versus being on testosterone? Like, let's start there.
With respect, like obviously they're going to have different side effects, but it's based off of like a risk-benefit analysis.
A risk-benefit analysis? I think the risk is a child is super spontaneous and doesn't know how to make adult decisions yet. And yeah, like I think that's, what else do I have to say?
I mean, it seems the chances of them making a bad decision that they're going to regret is about 1%.
Do not believe that study. I don't.
We can also refer to like other studies.
And
like,
it's only kids that are getting bottom surgery.
There was like this,
I hate that. I really forgot that too.
I've told
so
you.
Many trans kids aren't getting bottom surgery.
Kelly, I've told you that we.
Not even a fair point.
Kelly, I've told you that we have other studies, including populations that haven't gotten surgery, such as the Spanish cohort study, which I can give you the citation if you want.
Well, I would think that you would have gone out of your way to have shown a more accurate study in the first place, right?
I can give you the Spanish cohort study if you're interested. But what the Spanish cohort study did is they had a sample of all the trans people that referred to one of the biggest gender clinics in Spain, and out of all those that received medical gender-affirming treatment, only 8 out of a sample of almost 800 detransitioned and had regret, which was once again like 1% of the population, 1% of the sample, and this included people who didn't receive any kind of surgeries. It was a 10-year study.
10 years. And it's also, I'm sure that sample included a lot of non-binary people, right? Because they consider them to be trans.
It probably did
include
even
making a trans. It's probably really easy for non-binary people to not regret their transition because they aren't making one.
Wait, the study only included people who medically transitioned. Some non-binary people medically transition, some don't. It really depends on their individualized like medical care needs.
I guess I'd have to see that study. And how many people were in this study?
It was like 800.
I don't know. To me, I'd have to see it. Every article I've shown you that says something different than what you're saying and disproves what you're saying, you tell me
I can give you the Spanish,
even though they come from legitimate sources. So why am I going to sit here and believe your sources that you tell me are legitimate when mine are peer reviewed? A couple of them I had to pay to see.
So I've seen the sources that you're referring to, and they're just like the opinions of like a doctor. Meanwhile, the sources that I'm giving you,
every one of
the sources
these
that I'm
like
giving
opinions.
you had like wait,
half of these studies, dude, are like, are you happy? Have you not unalived yourself yet? Oh, that's a positive for the trans person.
Wait,
do you know
Kelly,
how pressure we put on kids to say they're happy and that they don't regret their transition because of the way you guys attack detransitioners?
Kelly, people aren't attacking detransitioners at like a gender clinic. They're allowed to detransition if they want to. But no. My question is, suppose we wanted to assess suicidal ideation within a given population. How are you going to assess suicidal ideation without asking them if they're feeling suicidal? Because, like, as far as I'm aware, we don't have any technology that can, like, read minds and read if people have suicidal thoughts.
Exactly. We don't have any technology to also ask someone if they're happy with their transition or if they would have been happier if they didn't, because we can't go back in time and make that comparison. So it makes a lot of your studies seem inconclusive.
What we can do is we can look at the outcomes of people who desired transition but did not receive it versus the people who desired transition and did receive it. What we find is that the mental health outcomes of those who desired and received transition end up being far better than those who didn't.
Because you don't even know if the people who weren't able to transition were actually even trans to begin with.
But if they like weren't even trans to begin with, then that like wouldn't that mean that they would have like different like mental health outcomes that would like make the mental health outcomes like worse in the sample? Like wouldn't that mean that if we still find this result, then it's a very robust result?
I also just have a hard time believing your results when you tell me all my peer-reviewed ones aren't accurate. So I just don't believe this data. If you really think, you truly believe less than 1% of trans people, including non-binary people to you, because you include them as trans, you think less than 1% of them regret their transition. I think it's so crazy if you believe that.
Yeah, please give me the evidence otherwise that
you're
like,
right. I don't have the little scientific evidence for you. I brought up articles, but you told me they're all not legitimate, even though they come from peer-reviewed resources. So why am I even going to bother?
I'm asking you for like an actual. I'm asking for like an actual study on like a sample.
Naomi finds it. It's
I'm asking you for a sample. Like a study that was actually conducted on a sample of trans people.
I did. I told you the statistic that it was like 30 to 40% of people ended up making a detransition of some kind. And you said, oh, that's not accurate, even though it's peer reviewed, just like all yours were.
So I told you that what the methodological flaw with that study was it conflated anybody who stopped taking their hormones as like a detransitioner and somebody who regretted their transition, when it included people who did stop taking hormones, but not because they regretted transition, but because they only wanted temporary effects of hormones. They only wanted to make their bodies more androgynous. That was actually their desired outcome. So counting that as a regret is dishonest.
I didn't see that clarification in the study. To me,
right, because you didn't read the study.
That to me, those people shouldn't have even been included in the study. But whatever.
Well, you didn't read the study. That's why you didn't know that it conflated
I did read the study.
Detransition and regret. No, you read the article which referenced the study, but you didn't read the study.
I don't know what else to tell you. I don't believe less than 1% of the population, no matter what study you show me, that they don't regret their transition. We've seen enough detransition
There's like
videos.
No study or evidence that could convince you.
We've seen enough detransition videos circulating to know that it's clearly more than 1%.
I mean, if you're admitting that like no study or no evidence could convince you, then you're admitting to coming into this conversation in bad faith.
No, I'm admitting that like you find any way to say my sources are like illegitimate when yours could be as well.
What I'm saying is I've seen the studies. I've seen the studies that you're citing, and I know that they're methodologically flawed, and that people who oppose transition like to cherry pick these studies that have methodological flaws.
I'm not cherry picking them. You didn't even go about the one I told you about the first female doctor.
I'm saying that the article which you're citing is cherry picking.
No, I'm not talking about
these studies with methodological flaws.
I'm not talking about that one anymore.
Which one are you talking about?
Give me 1 second. So the one about Dr. Christina Olson, who performed the studies that claimed trans youth had minimal differences of anxiety and depression and self-harm or self-worth compared to biological children who weren't trans. When I told you that they reanalyzed that data to claim that it was false and that research should be a warning to all to not accept research at a surface level.
So what was the correction?
How do I know that any of your peer-reviewed studies, which are only like probably done by a few doctors or PhD students, are accurate? How can I trust that?
Can you send me that study? Like what was the difference in correction that they found?
The difference in correction for, I'd have to send it to you because
send me that study, please.
Yeah.
You can send it over Discord or wherever you'd like.
1 second.
Go for it.
Wow, that's so cool of you.
Let's see.
So I don't use Discord at all.
That's okay.
Can I do it on the actual website because the app is being weird for me on my laptop.
You want to just like read me the URL? How big is the URL?
It's a pretty decent sized URL. I mean, I guess I could just
Can you just give me the article title? I can like Google search the article title.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Yeah. It is research on transgender children, what it seems, question mark. Comments on recent research on transgender children with high levels of parental support.
Okay, let's see.
Should be from a website that's ncbi.nlm.
Okay, we have found it. Let's see. Okay. Level of anxiety. Reports of self-worth. Reports of depression. Okay. We have the summary right here. Where is it saying? Okay, which study is it referring to? We have talking about the Olson study. This was mental health of transgender children who are supporting their identities. And then that's like talking about money. Okay, so where are they saying? Using an alpha coefficient. Hypothesis testing. Okay, seeing some tables. So it seems they're saying that, like, cisgender children still tend to have, like, typically better outcomes in general, which I don't dispute, because obviously cisgender children aren't going to be facing the amounts of, like, social ostracization along the lines of being trans. I don't think that this, like, defeats all of the evidence we have on the efficacy of social transition.
I feel like
it still shows that the levels. It still shows that the levels of, like, if you look at like the actual data in the study, it shows that even with this correction, which would take a lot to like actually go through, it seems that levels they're reporting are still like better than like the really high numbers that are cited in trans people before they transition, although not as good as cis people, which I think that's to be expected,
right?
Given the different sociological conditions which marginalize and otherize trans people. So I don't think that shows that. I don't think that this shows that. What this correction,
can't know those people who didn't transition are going to be happier if they transition. That's a huge assumption.
What this correction would show is that it's not like as big of an improvement as like the original study would have claimed, but it's not saying that it's like a detriment to children. It's actually showing that it's still positive, just not as positive as was previously claimed. So I don't think that it defeats the risk-benefit analysis of gender-affirming treatment or social.
No, I think the biggest takeaway from this study. I think the biggest takeaway from this study is that we shouldn't accept research at a surface level, which I think in my video last night proved that almost all of your sources were at a very surface level.
What the study you cited says is that further research is needed to explore factors underlying these results. But you don't want that further research to be conducted
have a quote from the article
you want to
that
ban gender transition.
Should be a warning to not accept all research at a surface level. That's a direct quote.
Right, and it says that further research is needed to explore factors underlying these results. And I agree, I want further research to be conducted, but you don't want further research to be conducted. Children. You want to ban this treatment and not allow us to even conduct this research.
There shouldn't be trans children.
You disagree with the study too, because this study explicitly states that further research is needed. And I agree, further research is needed.
Right,
further research is great.
But you're twisting what I meant. I brought this study up, which I clearly just told you the quote like 2 times. The whole point of this is to prove that a lot of these studies, like Dr. Christina Olson, who was putting out this misinformation that was supposed to be accurate and say, oh yeah, it actually is healthy for kids to transition. Clearly that wasn't accurate. So you can't just believe everything you read because it's a peer-reviewed study. That just shows how
I've never claimed that the peer review process is perfect. And
you are
this study,
using these articles.
I've never claimed that the peer review process is perfect.
You're saying they're so legitimate that they're good enough that kids should be able to take hormones. That's how much.
So I've never claimed that the peer review process is perfect. My claim has always been that the peer review process, it improves our accuracy and improves the access to the information, but rather that we need to look at peer-reviewed research holistically as what the broad collection of research shows. And it seems that you just disagree with even this study, which is claiming that, you know, things might not be as good as the previous study suggested. However, we should do more research. And you don't even want to do more research.
And the claim was that a lot of the research is BS or can be manipulated in a certain way, which I don't think is that far-fetched to believe.
The study did not say that
people would want to put out studies that are, you know, going more toward the left.
The study did not say that the research is BS.
That might be something that could happen?
The study did not say that the research is BS. What it said is that it might be.
Oh my God!
It said that it might be overestimated.
It was an expression.
And
are you serious?
That we should do additional research. Which I agree that we should do additional research.
Is there not a line in there that says the claim should be a warning to not?
Oh, I think you're cutting out again.
To be really cautious with the peer-reviewed articles that you're taking from.
Well, I think that we obviously should be cautious. We should take a look at the research holistically, and that we should do.
We should be cautious
conduct
by not giving
additional research.
That's how we should be cautious. I don't even think these studies matter at the end of the day, because we shouldn't be giving kids gender.
If you don't even think that the studies matter, then you're arguing in bad.
They don't matter when it comes to you trying to.
You are arguing in bad faith.
That's like a justification for pedophilia. And then you're like, well, the study says that it's natural. It doesn't fucking matter.
Kelly,
we shouldn't be giving drugs to kids to change their gender.
That's your argument, not mine. Your argument
is so accurate. What you're saying right now
please let me finish.
We took data on anything, even if it was something so awful as like pedophilia, and you're like, oh, well, the research says this, so that's
not what I'm saying.
Just because your research says something does not mean kids should be given drugs to transition.
Kelly, stop. I have never
predatory behavior.
I've let you make your point. Allow me to show you why that is fucking stupid.
It's
now, Kelly,
behavior.
Hold up. Let me finish. What I have said is that we need to look at the research holistically, and that I think the delineation point is harm. Pedophilia harms kids. It is shown to cause psychological trauma and abuse in kids. That's why it's not okay.
In a gender transition hurts kids. No study.
Stop, Kelly. I'm not finished. Kelly, I'm not finished. Kelly, please stop interrupting me. Kelly, hushy poo.
You interrupt me a lot too. You are so hypocritical.
I would like to finish this point. I let you finish your point.
You are such a hypocrite.
I let you finish your point. Please let me make this point.
Sometimes.
You claim that I would just say that, oh, pedophilia is natural, therefore it's okay. But I have never relied on the appeal to nature fallacy. That was your argument earlier. That we should just use what's like natural or normal as like okay. Kelly, stop. Kelly, stop. I have never once appealed to nature fallacy. You have been the one who has appealed to that, and I don't think that pedophilia is okay because it's actually shown to harm children.
Giving drugs to kids is okay.
Well, it's shown to help children. Therefore, yes, it's okay. If something is shown to help children, then yeah, that's a good thing. If something is shown to harm children, then yeah, that's a bad thing. And the fact that you admitted that the studies don't even matter shows that you are arguing in bad faith because you don't care about the facts. You don't actually care about the studies.
I care about the children.
What you care about
not giving kids gender-changing drugs.
What you care about is Kelly, stop.
I don't care
Kelly,
about
I'm still not done.
Saying it's okay
Kelly, I'm
for
still not
children
done.
to transition.
Kelly, I'm still not done.
You're absolutely right.
Kelly, I'm still not done. You've
admitted.
So one sec. I will let you talk as soon as I can finish my point.
It's that crazy? Dude,
Kelly, I will literally let you talk as soon as I finish my point. I was about to finish my point. I was about to finish my point, and then I will let you speak, okay? I'm saying that you're admitting that you don't care about the facts and all you care about is your common sense feelings. That is admitting to being in bad faith.
Because you're putting all your faith in tiny peer-reviewed studies and acting like no doctor could put out an inaccurate study or have bad intentions.
No, I don't.
That's your fantasy world.
No, I don't just put all of my faith in one study. I look at the body of research holistically. I look at the systematic literature reviews. I look at the broad collections of studies.
You look at reviews
and they
that fit
all
your
point
narrative.
to the exact same overwhelming trend.
You look for articles and sources that fit your narrative so you can make children transition. And
I look at the studies holistically,
and,
and the overwhelming body of peer-reviewed research on the subject is very clear. That gender transition helps trans people. It's really
not that overwhelming when you look at the details. I think my video last night made that clear.
Your video last night was you losing a debate in a pre-recorded video.
Losing a debate? Did you read the comments? The only people who agree with you are they-thems. Give me a break.
That's not true. And I mean, if you've seen the people that were agreeing,
majority of the people,
if you've seen
when you
the
click
people
on their profile that are talking shit, are they, them, and non-binary people.
If you've seen the people who agreed with you, the people that agreed with you included a lot of transphobes and TERFs. And
absolutely not. They're not transphobic to me because I'm a real transgender person.
Wait, Kelly, there were a lot of TERFs who were propagating up your posts and retweeting it and signal boosting it. You do acknowledge that, right?
So why are TERFs bad? Because they want to differentiate between biological women and trans women. I'm not a biological woman. I am a transgender woman.
TERFs are bad TERFs are bad because they want to deny legal protections to trans people. They want to kick trans people out of bathrooms.
All of them. Only some of them. I've known some.
The vast majority of TERFs don't want you in the bathroom with them, Kelly.
Oh my God, no, they don't care because they wouldn't know because I put in the effort to pass because I'm actually trans.
No,
this is why the bathroom debate didn't matter before you guys came around.
The majority of TERFs do not want to share a bathroom with you.
Transition, and then no one would even know when you went in the bathroom.
The majority of TERFs do not want to share a bathroom with you if they knew.
Right, but they wouldn't know because I put in the effort, unlike these other trans people.
So you just admitted that the TERFs' ideas are harmful and wrong.
I don't think they're harmful and wrong.
But if they knew, they wouldn't want you in the bathroom with them.
But the thing is, TERFs weren't really even a thing before you guys made this an issue. Now, trans people don't even have to pass anymore. You've created TERFs.
No, TERFs existed even back when like medical transition was still just kind of like first being researched. Actually, a lot of the TERFs
as a community,
a lot of the TERFs,
that's for damn sure, right?
Well, a lot of the TERFs who existed back around in like the 1930s Germany, when medical transition was first being researched, ended up supporting the Nazi Party, which ended up burning a lot of the research we had on trans people, a lot of the earliest research we had on trans people. And surprise, surprise, again, you see today TERFs propping up neo-Nazi groups.
I've never seen that.
You've never seen that, such as Posey Parker, who invited neo-Nazis to her Let Women Speak Melbourne event, and the neo-Nazis were holding up signs saying "Stop pedo freaks," referring to all trans people as pedo freaks. And
I don't agree with that, but I do see their signs though, like the ones that just went viral the other day on the trucks in New York City that said "Women are women." I agree with that. Women are women. Yeah, and trans women are trans women.
Yeah, that's tautologically true. Nobody disagrees with that.
I think a lot of TERFs.
That'd be like saying Kelly,
they all thought
that would be like saying that squares are squares. Everybody agrees with that.
Of a community, if you were all like me, if you all actually wanted to make a gender transition, TERFs would not be as strong of a community.
Oh, TERFs would absolutely still be a thing, even if everybody was like a binary transsexual.
The numbers would not be the same.
Well, I mean, even back in the earlier days of medical transition, when, it was primarily just binary transsexuals who were researched, yeah, there were TERFs in Weimar, Germany, and these were the TERFs that helped the Nazis rise to power.
I don't know why we're going back in time like this as if it's relevant to today.
Well, because you said that even if it was just like binary transsexuals, then TERFs wouldn't really be a problem. And I'm saying that this was a time where we really only had like binary transsexuals being researched, and TERFs were a problem even then.
Okay, but there was definitely way less of them. They've become a stronger community because of people like you.
I don't think that's true at all. I mean, if we build a stronger, broader coalition, then it's a lot easier to fight harmful TERF rhetoric, like the kind of TERFs that think that you shouldn't be able to go to the bathroom with them.
You're the type of person that like says J.K. Rowling is transphobic.
Oh, she absolutely is.
She's absolutely not.
So, do you remember when J.K. Rowling said that she would march and support trans people if they were marginalized or discriminated against, implying that trans people don't face any kind of marginalization or discrimination? That seems pretty transphobic to me.
Someone who puts in the effort to pass and you're a logical human being who isn't forcing your pronouns on anybody, I think you would find that society would be way more accepting of you.
That has nothing to do with whether or not...
I don't feel like I have...
That has nothing to do with whether or not J.K. Rowling's transphobic. That has nothing to do with whether or not J.K. Rowling's transphobic, but J.K. Rowling genuinely does not believe that trans people face social marginalization or ostracization along the lines of being trans. That is just a denial of reality.
I think she thinks that because there's trans people like you in the world. I don't think she's referring to people like me.
I mean, you absolutely still face marginalization and ostracization along the lines of being trans. I mean,
never
Kelly,
get treated
even if you
badly
look at
IRL.
even if you look at your own comment
badly.
section,
I don't get discriminated against.
Oh, I mean,
no one discriminates
in my
against
everyday
me.
life, me neither. But if you just look at your own comment section, there are plenty of people calling you a man and dehumanizing you in your own comment section.
That's the name of the game. That's the internet.
Yeah, that shows that trans people are bullied online for being trans.
Who cares? Get a grip. People are bullied for everything.
Yeah, I don't think that we should bully people.
I don't think we should either, but I think it's, you really think you're just going to get rid of bullying? Like, you're never going to get rid of bullying on the internet. It just is what it is.
I mean, we can certainly,
I honestly feel like it's a huge part of growing up, just learning to
we can certainly take steps.
Do you not think that that's a big part of growing up, learning to just not care what people say and not crying about it?
I mean, I think that people should have a thicker skin in general. But we can absolutely take steps to reduce the amount of bullying and marginalization that happens, such as, for example, we have studies which show that when you teach kids at an age-appropriate level about the existence of gay people or trans people, they're less likely to bully kids for being gay or trans. Like, we can actually take steps to reduce that.
No, I agree with you on that. I have no issue. I think there's a line, but I think there's no issue with telling kids that some people can have two moms and some people can have two dads, and that's okay. But I don't think it should go any farther than that. But I think that, yes, that would make a more accepting generation of kids and adults.
Wait, why is it okay? Why is it okay to say that some parents have two moms and some parents have two dads, but it's not okay to say that Kelly used to be a boy, but now she's a girl?
Because that's confusing children.
It's not confusing.
Kids can confuse that. No, let me explain. Let me speak. It's because a kid can make the decision and say, oh, I think I'm trans and I'm going to go make irreversible damaging decisions after I go to therapy for it because I'm just going to tell this therapist that I feel like the other gender and they're going to buy it, versus being gay, which I genuinely believe is not, you cannot control your sexuality. I don't think anyone can just become gay. Like, to me, a kid even just hearing what gay means and saying I'm gay isn't really a big deal, because it's truly just not something you choose. You just either are or you aren't. Transition, there's a whole window of opportunity for a kid to go down the wrong path and mess up their whole life. It is absolutely not the same thing. So
homophobes said this exact same thing about gay people, but I want to be clear, there's a very big difference between telling a kid that trans people exist, or for example, Kelly is a transgender woman. That means that she used to be a boy and now she's a girl. Versus telling a kid, you are transgender, be transgender. Like, you can explain what a transgender person is without, like, telling people to be transgender. Just like how you can,
Why do we need to explain
just like how
why
you can,
would you even as a transgender woman want that?
Because it reduces the bullying that trans people face. It's been shown in the studies. Like, I don't want trans people to be bullied for being trans. There shouldn't be
trans people that even look trans. Trans people should be going out of their way
to
Kelly, pass and blend into society. You shouldn't, Kelly, as a trans person, you shouldn't want to tell a child that you're trans, or anyone that you're trans. You should want to pass.
But Kelly, you want to make it harder for trans people to pass by denying them gender-affirming care until they're an adult.
It is not impossible to pass when you transition past 18. I'm pretty sure Blair transitioned after 18. And she looks great.
That's an anecdote.
An anecdote? Okay, I don't know what that means. I've been out of school for a long time.
Clearly. So an anecdote is you just point out to, like, one example, not any kind of, like, broader trend or data. So essentially,
I'm sorry, I don't use big fancy words to make myself sound smart. I just say smart shit.
Yeah, everybody's aware of all of the smart shit you've been saying here, but my point is that we have studies.
People who are on your side does not mean they're gonna, because the second they take these clips and post them, the majority of people will agree with me.
I'm sure everybody's gonna agree with you when you said that people enjoy being slaves.
Oh my God, because that's literally, I probably could pull up articles that prove that.
I'm sure everybody's gonna agree with you. I'm sure everybody's gonna agree with you. Anyways, what I was saying is that if we teach kids about the existence of trans people, it's shown to reduce the bullying that trans people face, and I think that's a good thing.
So I can't say what I said about slavery, which is probably just a fact, but you can say that you want to abuse children by giving them pharmaceutical drugs and changing their gender.
How is that abuse?
That's okay. You're a predator. Don't try to make me look like a racist when you're a predator. You're a predator. You're abusing children.
How is it abuse?
How dare you try to make me look racist when you are just a child predator?
You haven't demonstrated how it's predation or abusive in any way.
You're giving a child hormones and life-changing, body-changing drugs.
Yeah, because they help them.
If a 15-year-old goes on hormones, gets boob development, and at 17 goes, oh shit, I don't really want this, and now they have to go get surgery to get their boobs removed, and now they have scars on themselves, and now they have all this other shit that they've had from the transition that's affected their whole body and their puberty.
So that's the 1% case, and I do
It's not the
deeply
1%
care.
because there are
I
so many
do
trans people who go
deeply
on
care
HRT that don't get
about
surgery. That study is only
detransitioners.
accurate with trans people who have had the surgery.
I've told you I've referenced other studies such as the Spanish cohort, which includes more than just surgery, for example.
With your study, I don't think your peer-reviewed studies are accurate, especially based off of
you
the ones
you don't think
last
that
night.
you don't think that studies in general are accurate. Stop trying to pretend.
I think the studies I gave
stop
you,
trying
I
to
think
pretend
the
like
study I gave you was
Kelly,
pretty accurate.
you literally admitted
every time I
Kelly,
give you a study,
you literally admitted that you
go
don't
out of
believe
your
in
way
studies.
to say it's inaccurate, but anytime you give me one, I have to automatically believe it. That's not how this works. They're
Kelly,
both peer-reviewed. They're both accurate studies.
Kelly, you have literally admitted that you don't believe that that studies are real, that you don't care what the studies say. You're going to fall back on common sense regardless of what the studies say.
Giving drugs to children? Absolutely. I don't believe what the studies say.
Please, stop.
I don't. And I think you live in a fantasy world if you don't think the pharmaceutical industry wants to make kids trans to get them on prescription drugs for life. I think you're in a fantasy world if you don't think some of these peer-reviewed articles can be inaccurate.
Kelly,
stop trying to make me look like the bad one.
Please stop pretending that you care about the studies, because you have admitted time and time again that you don't care what the studies say.
I don't care about studies that say we should be giving pharmaceutical body-changing drugs to children. Absolutely.
So, Kelly, you don't care about the studies. Stop trying to fall back on studies, because you have already admitted
trying to give drugs to children.
You have already admitted that regardless of what the studies say, nothing can change your mind. You have admitted to being bad faith and to not believing in any kind of scientific method.
So wanting kids to go on HRT and changing their gender.
Yeah,
minors.
Because it helps them.
That's disgusting.
Because it helps them.
You are a bad person.
Because I'm trying to help kids.
You're abusing kids.
You haven't even shown how it's abuse in any kind of way.
How it's abuse in any kind of way. I think it's pretty easy to tell.
All you said is that detransition exists, which I acknowledge.
A kid can believe they're anything. Just because you have one study that isn't even accurate. It literally just says less than 1% of trans people who have had the surgery don't regret it. Not the majority. And then you say, oh, I have this other study that I haven't sent to you. And I can't check all the little factoids right now to be is this accurate?
Do you want to see that
study? I don't even care about the data because we shouldn't be giving drugs to kids.
And there you say it again. You don't care about the data. So stop trying to pretend that you care about the data, because you clearly don't.
I care about the data when it's accurate.
But the problem is,
I care about the data when it's accurate.
And how do you tell when the data is accurate? If it agrees with you?
When it's not about giving drugs to kids. Because there's no way to justify
so
that.
Any data which agrees with you is accurate, and any data which disagrees with you is inaccurate?
Sit there and say that when you're doing the same shit to me with my sources. All of yours are accurate, but mine aren't. You are
I've actually acknowledged that some of the studies you cited had merit, such as the one which showed that, hey, here's a correction, this one might not be as efficacious as was previously claimed, and we should do some more research. I've conceded to that. I've admitted that your studies...
What article was that? Because I don't remember you saying that.
That was the one which was titled, Is Research on Transgender Children What It Seems? Comment on recent research on transgender children with high levels of parental support. And when we went through the study, it showed that there were some studies in the past, particularly done by Dr. Olson, which might have overestimated the potential benefits of social transition. And then this study called for further research needed to explore the factors underlying these results. And yeah, I agree. It seems that it's very possible for these studies to have overestimated some of the certain benefits, and that I want more research to be done. So you cited the study at me, and I agree. I agree with the conclusion of that study. So you can't act like I have just said that everything you've cited is completely false, because I've conceded that yes, what this study is saying is true.
For the most part, you have.
I haven't said that it's completely false. I've often said that it's based off of a flawed methodology.
Yours are, except for that one, I guess.
Well, if I have one that's not based off of a flawed methodology, why do you reject it?
Because I think it's common sense that children shouldn't be given drugs.
Right, because you don't care about studies. You just care about your common sense feelings.
No, I care about not giving drugs to kids, you child predator.
You know that calling me a child predator isn't an argument, because you haven't even proven that claim.
It's accurate when you're saying you want to give drugs to kids to change their gender.
Well, I want to give drugs to kids who are going to benefit from those drugs, such as giving antidepressants to kids that suffer from depression, or such as giving ADHD meds to kids who suffer from ADHD, or giving gender-affirming treatment.
You're never going to convince me giving gender-affirming care to minors is okay. Ever.
Thank you for admitting to being in bad faith.
I'm not in
because
bad
here's
faith.
the thing.
I want to protect the children. You want to
Wait,
abuse
Kelly,
children.
what do you think bad faith means?
What, that I have bad intentions?
That's not what bad faith means.
Okay. I'm so sorry I didn't give you the definition you were looking for. Why don't you inform me?
So bad faith means somebody who is open to having their mind changed if presented with evidence which falsifies their claims.
Right. You're giving me a bunch of BS evidence that came to conclusions with very little evidence, and then asking me to believe something as crazy as giving pharmaceutical drugs to children to change their gender.
You've said that every study I've cited has had merit.
It doesn't have merit. It's based off of a study of very few people most of the time.
You've said they're peer-reviewed and legitimate.
Right, but so were mine, and now those aren't accurate either.
I'm not saying that everything you're citing is inaccurate. I'm saying that some of them, the conclusions that you're extrapolating from them, are based off of flawed methodologies.
And I said the same thing about yours last night, correct?
You have, although it seems that you're misguided.
Wasn't. That's your opinion.
Okay. So, well, like, your criticisms, for example, was things about, like, having shorter follow-ups, but when I also cite studies that have longer follow-ups, or having, like, smaller sample sizes, but I can also cite studies that have larger sample sizes. For every weakness you point out...
the largest you had was, like, a 10-year gap, right?
For every
the largest you had was a 10-year gap. That's nothing for a gender transition.
Well, you actually asked how things would look like 10 years down the line in your response video, but if you were listening earlier, I said that...
10, 15.
I said that...
Yeah.
I said that the second study I cited included people who were up to 25 years after receiving puberty blockers. That's 10 more years than you asked for. So that could be just
someone that... So if it's someone who took puberty blockers, that assumes they were young enough to be prescribed them, right? So we're talking like 15, 16, 17. And then how long you say? 25 years? So we're talking about someone in their mid-30s?
Yeah.
Don't think that's enough time to see if they're going to have regrets. I would be so curious to see when they're older if they have regrets, because it's so hard to get someone to admit
there's the goalpost shift. Because in your response, you asked for 10, 15 years, and now I give you 25 years, and you're saying, well, that's not enough. Why do you have to shift the goalpost?
Because your analysis was based off of people who were given puberty blockers, not just HRT in general.
Right. You said that.
So there's the difference. We're talking about now kids over a long period of time that started very young. And then you're like, okay, well then they're only in their mid-30s at that point.
So wait, how long do you need? Because earlier you said like 10, 15 years. How long do you need?
Even in their mid-30s, you can be so far into a transition that what if they just don't even want to accept that? And it's also just like a lot of these people that are getting studied. Do you think people that regret their transition would even want to like give their answer to a study?
Yeah.
I wouldn't want, if I was a detransitioner, I would probably distance myself far from anything that is transition in general or transgender. And I bet you people that are really hardcore trans people that are super left probably go out of their way to like participate in these surveys.
If you were a detransitioner and you wanted better diagnostic and screening criteria, you would actively want to participate in research so that we can better identify detransitioning populations versus people who are happy being trans. But I'm asking you once again,
you're never going to be able to compare that because
how long?
Know the
my question to you is, how long of a study are you going to need? Because earlier you said that 10, 15 years would be good, but now you're saying that 25 years isn't enough. So how long do you need?
It's still good, but I still don't feel like that. How big was the study again?
So they had an experimental group of 89 and a control group of like 3,400.
That qualifies for all trans people. And like I said, who are the people who are going out of their way to participate in these studies? So not people who detransition, not people who regret their transition.
We can use the mathematical, statistically rigorous processes to determine what kind of sample size we need in order to have a statistically significant sample. And this is 3 times approximately what we would need to have like a statistically significant sample.
And
it's a pretty decent sample size.
You don't think people go out of their way that are so far left to find people who don't regret their transition and get it so these numbers look better than they actually are?
I mean, the study that we're talking about, the trans survey, also included people who detransitioned. Those numbers are there too. But like, here's the problem.
I never said they. But I mean,
this is the entire problem.
if I'm someone who wants to create a realistic looking study, but a study that's going to work in my favor, which is not that crazy of a thing to do, to think people would do, I would want to get a few people who actually regret it just so I could make that statistic look legitimate. Like, people aren't stupid.
What's your evidence that this was happening?
I don't have any evidence for you, but I think it's a pretty strong assumption, especially with how politics is right now in the left. I do not think it's that crazy of an idea that people would manipulate statistics to work in their favor, especially for transgender youth.
I mean, intentionally manipulating statistics is going to get you banned from publishing in the academic community for life. Like,
no,
this is
because
taken as a very serious crime in the academic community. You are banned from publishing in academic. You are banned from publishing in journals for your life if you are found to be guilty of manipulating data and studies. Like, the academic community takes this very seriously.
You act like people don't commit crimes every day.
I'm saying that it seems to be exceptionally rare for people to misrepresent and manipulate studies like this. So that's why we should take a holistic
I think it's pretty easy to get away with it legally speaking.
That's why we should take a holistic view on the overwhelming body of peer-reviewed literature. But my broader problem with your approach is that the studies are never going to be enough for you, because you've already admitted that you don't care about the facts. And as soon as you say, like, I need like 10, 15 years, I give you 25 years, you'll say that 25 years isn't enough. If you say that 60% reduction in suicidality is not enough, I give you 70% reduction in suicidality, you're going to say that's not enough. No matter what study I give you, you're always going to say it's not enough because you believe in your feelings over the facts.
No, I believe in not abusing children.
And I have demonstrated that transition is not child abuse. It actually improves children's lives. It improves their well-beings. It improves their mental health.
Have you seen this Naomi TikTok?
It doesn't. It doesn't.
And your evidence that
in a very rare case scenarios, you guys are teaching kids
your evidence
to be trans in schools now.
So wait.
You're teaching kids to go on HRT.
What's your evidence?
You know we're going to see a huge increase in people regretting it, and it's all going to be your fault. It's going to be people like you.
What's your evidence that gender transition harms trans people?
Oh my God, the fact that you even would say that is crazy. You're like, what's the problem if you get on some hormones and you end up wanting to detransition?
I didn't ask
you
about.
Probably shouldn't be doing that in the first place.
I didn't ask you. I didn't ask you about harms.
You are so out of your mind.
I didn't ask you about harms to detransitioners. I'm asking you what's the harm to trans people.
You are so far gone.
I'm asking you what's the harm to trans people, not to detransitioners.
Trans people? What do you mean? To transition at a young age?
Do you have any evidence that a trans person transitioning at a young age hurts them? Like, do you have any evidence?
Yeah, the shit ton of detransitioner videos.
I'm not talking about detransitioners. I'm talking about trans people. What's your evidence that gender transition hurts trans people?
I never said it hurts people. I said it's probably the right choice for
you said it was child abuse.
Amount of people.
You said it was predatory and child abuse.
If you're doing it under 18. Oh, you're talking minors?
Yeah.
If we're talking minors, yes, that's child abuse.
So what's your evidence that gender transition hurts trans minors, not detransitioners, but trans minors?
Because a lot of times the people who do say they are detransitioning are people who transitioned under the age of 18.
Kelly, I'm not asking about detransitioners. I'm asking about trans people. Are you listening?
You're asking why it hurts them. The people that are getting hurt by transitioning early are the people who end up detransitioning. That's the answer.
Okay, so you think it's only detransitioners who are hurt by medical transition?
I mean, I think the non-binary community and anyone who identifies as anything that's like not in the binary are going to end up having serious regrets when they're older.
Seems to be the case that they're not. But I guess, like, what's your evidence that...
Yeah, they might not want to admit it.
What's your evidence that non-binary people are harmed by transition or that they regret transition?
I mean, I don't have a peer-reviewed article for you, but I just don't think it's a logical thing. I think anyone that identifies as non-binary is just not mentally well. You are not mentally well if you don't believe you're a man or a woman. You're out of your mind.
So, I mean, like, I recognize that when I move through society, people perceive and treat me as a woman. I recognize that my biology is that of a transsexual female. That has nothing to do with my gender identity. So I'm not out of my mind in any way.
I mean, are you sure?
Yeah. I just told you I acknowledge my biological reality. I acknowledge my lived social experience. And that has nothing to do with my gender identity. It doesn't dictate my gender identity. So why am I delusional then?
I meant like the perceived thing.
Yeah, people perceive me as a woman when I go out in society. Like, I recognize that.
Okay.
So how am I like delusional?
I think you're delusional because I don't think people see you that way in society.
You don't think that people perceive and treat me as a woman?
I think they might perceive you as a trans woman.
You don't think that I pass?
I don't.
Really? Why is that?
I mean, I don't want to offend you. I mean, you're saying you're not delusional.
No,
and to me,
please,
that just feels like a delusional statement.
please tell me why I don't pass.
Why? So I can look like a bad, evil, mean person and you can repost it on your account and get all the sympathy comments.
I mean, you seem to think that I don't pass, but I'm deluded about the way that people treat me. Like, everybody calls me Miss Ma'am, she, her, just like...
Right, you look like a transgender woman. You don't look like a man, but you look like a transgender woman.
So wait, how do I not pass?
Because you're not... What do you mean?
I'm asking you, like, in what way I don't pass?
In terms of me, passing means looking like you're in the binary. That's what that means to me.
Mm-hmm. Everybody I interact with in like a social context,
the look of in the binary.
Thinks that I'm a woman.
Is that mean that I'm being honest?
Like, why do you think that people don't perceive me as a woman?
Facial structure.
Because of my facial structure? This is a facial structure that's pretty common in lots of women, including cis women.
All I know is, like, I mean, I don't really know what else to say to you. I don't agree with you personally. I mean, we all like see ourselves differently, I guess, when we look in the mirror.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you don't think that people perceive me as a woman when I move throughout society, like, I think that you're the delusional one. I mean, cis women, like, have talked to me about biological functions that I don't have.
I'm delusional for thinking people don't see you as a woman out in public, a biological woman.
Yes,
you
because
think that makes
because I know what my
delusional.
Because I know what my Kelly, I know what my lived experience is, and you're trying to say that you know better than what my lived experience is.
People will say things. People will say things. It is.
Yeah, people say things about you too, Kelly. Transphobes online are going to misgender us because they know that we're trans. Kelly, transphobes online are going to misgender all of us because they're transphobic. But in public, everybody perceives and treats me as a woman. Cis women have asked me about biological functions that I don't have because they just assume that I'm a cis woman. And if you don't believe me, then you are the delusional one because I know my lived social experience better than you do.
You're a biological woman. People do not look at you and think you're a biological woman. If you believe,
why do they like ask me about my period?
Probably to be nice to you.
Do you think that people ask you about your period to be nice? What?
Yeah, I definitely could see a cis or a biological woman being like, oh, that's a trans woman. I want to make her feel good about herself, so I'm going to pretend like she's cis. I could totally see that.
Kelly, you are so delusional.
I'm not, though. You are delusional if you think you look like a biological woman.
That's how society seems to perceive and treat me.
They might treat you as a trans woman, but they definitely know you're not a biological woman. 100%.
Every indication I've had from the people I've talked to has shown otherwise. Every person I've come out to as a trans woman, after only meeting me, has always said that they were incredibly surprised and never knew.
Yes, they say that to every trans person who doesn't
pass. No, they don't. Kelly, you are so brainwormed by this highly toxic, terminally online passing standards, which is just not realistic. Kelly, by the standards which you're going by, if you just walked into a Walmart, you're going to be clocking like a ton of cis women there. Tons of cis women won't even pass by these terminally online toxic standards you have, which just do not reflect actual reality.
Thousands of women in the store every day. If I walked past you, I would know you are trans. I am not lying to you.
You would not, Kelly. I know my own lived social experience better than you do.
So funny that you're gonna call me delusional when people literally laugh. I don't even know what to say anymore.
People laugh at what?
It's such a joke that you're literally saying I'm delusional when you think you pass.
Yeah, because I know my own lived experience.
No, you know what your followers tell you, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I exclusively get hate regarding my gender identity online. In my public social life, nobody gives me hate or misgenders me or clocks me. That's something that only happens online.
Because you look like a trans woman, even if you can tell people today are going to go out of their way to respect your pronouns, it doesn't mean you look like a biological woman. Why can't you just accept that? And if you
Kelly,
really want to it,
even in the lead up to this debate, I have had people from your community thinking that I'm like F to non-binary because they perceive me as like a they fab, for example. Like
they perceive you as they perceive you as a transgender woman.
Then how come people were saying that I'm like a non-binary born female? Like from your own community, because of just how they perceive me.
Must be some crazy people you're talking to.
I'm telling you, I have screenshots of this happening where people from your community have been trying to misgender me by calling me a female because they think that I'm a non-binary AFAB person.
That's just not true. Go read, anyone who's watching this live stream, go read my comments with her in the video. That's just not true.
I have screenshots of this happening.
People are making comments about your appearance.
Okay. And a lot of the people that are making these comments do know that I'm trans and they're going to be transphobic and misgender me. But the people who don't know, I've seen lots of them claiming that I'm AFAB. And I know what my lived social experience is when we're not in this terminally online setting where, you know, my trans is not displayed in my bio. People just assume that I'm a cis woman.
This is really important to you, isn't it?
I'm just telling you the truth, and I'm trying to correct your delusional thinking, but it seems that you are very deep in these terminally online, toxic passing standards, which are delusionally inaccurate and do not reflect reality.
Because I think you don't look like a biological woman because it's painfully obvious. Give me a friggin' break.
How is it painfully obvious?
Should I repeat myself? Bone structure.
What's the bone structure that gives it away?
Your bone structure looks like that of a man. Mine does a little bit too.
Like how so?
It's just, I mean, I'm not a doctor. I don't know the technical terms. I just know what I see with my eyes.
What about my bone structure like tells you that I'm biologically male?
Again, I'm not a doctor. I don't have like all these technical terms.
So you just like don't know. Like you can point to regions. You can be like, oh, it's the chin or the nose or the brow or the cheek or the what's the bone structure that gives it away?
I never really get people because I don't really look at that way. To me, it's just like I take a look at you and I just perceive you as one or the other.
And what's the base? Like what's that based off of? Like what's the factor that you're using to determine this?
It's just I don't have a specific answer to you or to give you. It's literally just you either look like a biological.
So you think that I'm super clocky and you can't explain why?
Shoulders too. I've accepted my wide shoulders and my big hands. Like you can accept your stuff too.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy living in the body that I'm in, and I also know how people treat me in society. And you claiming that you know better about my lived social experience because of your toxic, terminally online passing standards is delusion. That's my point.
It's so obvious. I'm sorry.
It's so obvious that you can't explain how.
You're getting so angry.
I'm not angry at all.
You sound pretty angry.
Well, I guess you can't read emotions either.
I guess not. I can't read at all, apparently.
Yeah, we found that one out.
Yeah, we definitely did.
So like what about my voice makes me sound angry?
You were definitely on the defense there for a second, but now you're going out of your way to lower it because I called you out.
What was like the defense?
Oh my god, can we talk about like something important or like should we just end this?
I mean, it's up to you. I think that, let me see if I had any other thing that I wanted to bring up. Okay. I guess there's a couple points where we haven't really gotten anywhere, like with you trying to justify why it's like wrong for a kid to like change their pronouns, or like why they should have to wait until they're 18 to change their pronouns. We do have studies on social transition, and they also show that trans people's mental health and overall being are improved when they're allowed to socially transition, even at ages before like medical treatment would be even offered. Being allowed to socially transition tends to improve the mental health outcomes of trans youth. So if somebody just wants to like change their pronouns or change the way they dress, even as a kid, yeah, seems like a good thing that helps them. So like, what's wrong with that?
I'll be exposed to non-binary to even know what non-binary is. Absolutely not.
What about somebody who identifies as like binary trans at like the age of 7 and they want to wear like opposite gender clothing and go by like opposite gender pronouns and like a name?
You can experiment with clothing. If someone wants to wear a dress or whatever, that's fine. But do not let them affect their pronoun. There's no need for that.
So why is it harmful for a kid to change their pronouns?
They're actually non-binary. They're going to grow up and realize they're non-binary.
What if it's like a binary pronoun change? Let's just focus on a binary pronoun change for a minute. What's wrong if a trans kid wants to change their pronouns in a binary fashion?
What do you mean in terms of a binary fashion?
Like,
you mean in terms of your...
Like a child who was assigned male at birth and now they want to go by she, her pronouns and say they're like 12 years old. Like, what's wrong with that?
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't be changing your pronouns.
Why not?
I mean, in terms of like, and I will, you know what, maybe I'll be a little lenient here. If they're like, maybe like in high school, at that point, I'm like, if you want to do a pronoun change, whatever, because at least by high school, I think you know what you're doing and there's no permanent side effects to changing your pronoun. But in terms of a child, when you're that young and like you're just sucking everything in, I really just feel like they should not be exposed to what it means to be non-binary. Because I truly think
this doesn't have anything to do with being non-binary. We're talking about a binary pronoun change. So like I'm asking you, what's wrong if like say a 12-year-old or a 7-year-old wants to go by the other binary pronouns? Like what's wrong with that?
It's the same thing for trans people. It's the same thing for a binary pronoun change. I feel the exact same way. If it's a child, no. Pronoun changes, I think, like when you're in high school. But in elementary school...
No. I'm asking you, like, why is it bad in elementary school? I know that you're like, okay, maybe in high school. And the question to you is, like, why it's bad in elementary school? Because we have studies which show otherwise.
Right. You have so many studies about why it's okay to let children transition. I'm very aware.
Yeah, because reality disagrees with you.
No, the reality is we have a lot of bad people in this world. We have people manipulating studies and we have people like you pushing them. And now we have kids transitioning. We have pharmaceutical industries who want to make a shit ton of money off of us. And they want to make more people trans than they really are because it's all about the money and also making people infertile and the feminization of boys. But you just don't want to believe reality. You just want to believe your facts that are just written on your screen and say they're legitimate because you trust everything you read that has a great source.
So this has nothing to do with like why a kid changing their pronouns is wrong. Like, can you explain that to me?
It definitely is all connected because why does a kid need to know about pronoun changes at all? They shouldn't.
Well, like I've said earlier, teaching kids about the existence of trans people reduces the amounts of bullying which trans people face. That's a good thing. And also, like I said earlier, when children are allowed to socially transition, they have improved mental health outcomes. So what's wrong with that?
I'm sorry, no child growing up is doing better mentally transitioning in high school. Did you go to high school?
Yes.
You're living in a fantasy.
So all of the studies which show that trans people's mental health is better after transitioning are just wrong? Like every single one of the hundreds of studies we have on the subject are just wrong?
Absolutely. You yourself said trans people face a shit ton of discrimination.
Yeah, and if we were to teach people about trans people, they would face less discrimination. I'm actually trying to advocate for solutions, for things that are going to help reduce the amount of bullying that trans people face. And so I'm really curious, like, why can't you accept us doing anything to actually improve the lives of trans people?
If you are not improving the life of a child in school going through a transition, I can guarantee you that.
Well, the studies say otherwise.
Right, the studies always say otherwise.
Yeah, because reality disagrees with you.
You're right. My experiences don't matter at all, even though I'm actually trans.
Well, I think that your experience is something that can be recorded, but as a single anecdote, it really doesn't paint the whole picture. That's why we need broader studies and systematic literature reviews, which holistically assess the entire body of research we have on a subject.
Bad intention. You believe anything someone that has a degree tells you.
No.
And you act.
No, I don't.
You do. You do.
No. For example, there are people with degrees who are anti-vaxxers, and I don't believe what they say because the facts disprove them.
Right. You only believe people who are backing up with diplomas when it's fitting your narrative.
No. It's based off of what the data, the overwhelming body of data, actually shows.
Right. And when the other people have their overwhelming data, it's not accurate in your eyes.
Wait, overwhelming data? Like, what percent of the bodies of studies show that, like, gender transition harms trans people? Like, what percent of studies show positive results versus what percent of studies show negative results?
Oh, I don't have a little comparison here to
because
tell you.
It's like it's in the 90% of studies showing clear positive results.
Studies. And then every time I give you a study, it's, oh, that one's not legitimate, even though it comes from a peer-reviewed source. So.
That's not what I said. I said that you're misinterpreting things based off of methodological flaws. Not that it's completely inaccurate.
Then neither are yours.
Wait, you're once again diverting from my question of why it's harmful for a kid to change their pronouns.
Because it's a child, and you should know better as a grown-ass adult.
Why is it harmful though? That's not a reason why it's harmful.
Because you're giving drugs to a child for a gender transition.
I said changing pronouns, not giving them drugs. What's wrong with changing pronouns? Are you listening to me?
We're already talking about pronoun changes are fine. Like I said, if it's like a kid that's 14 or 15 and they're
I'm asking you about a younger kid. Why is it wrong for a younger kid to change their pronouns?
Children, they don't need to be exposed to that. More people don't need to be non-binary. We don't want more people to grow up being non-binary.
Kelly. Kelly, you're not listening to me. I'm not asking about non-binary people. I'm not asking about medical transition here. I'm asking about a binary trans person who is, say, around the age of 7, who wants to go by she, her pronouns. What's wrong with that?
It's because it's a child, and they shouldn't be, it's confusing them.
It's not confusing at all.
Confusing. You're telling a child that they can actually be the other gender when that's just not true. And they
I said changing pronouns, not like literally being the other gender.
Be making the decision as a minor to live the transgender lifestyle because you don't know what you're getting into. It's a kid. What are you getting?
I'm just not getting how it's harmful because you haven't demonstrated how it's harmful.
That children can just be impulsive and they believe they're things that they aren't very frequently. And if you teach them that you can make a gender transition, they'll probably start believing that. And eventually, because you guys push this ideology, woke parents are going to think they're transphobic unless they actually believe their kids and put them on permanent drugs. And then they're going to end up making a mistake and making detransition videos. And then you're going to sit here and be like, oh, well, it's only less than like 1% who regret it. So fuck all those kids, even though you know it's probably higher. And the data just doesn't want to say that because of this left woke agenda.
I'm not talking about drugs right now. And I'm also not saying fuck detransitioners. I think that detransitioners should access the specialized medical care they need. Wait, Kelly, what do you think is the question that I'm trying to ask you?
About drugs, because you are. Wait, anyone that starts off
specifically, what do you think the question that I'm trying to ask you right now? Like, what's the question that I really care about that I really want you to answer right now?
What happens after a kid does a pronoun change? What's the very next step in a transition? HRT, and you're very aware of that.
No, I think it really depends on their individualized needs. I think there are some kids who only end up wanting to change their pronouns and they're just fine living like that. Maybe somebody even just changed their pronouns temporarily. Nothing's harmed by a pronoun change, and then maybe later they realize that, you know what, I don't really identify that way, and that's okay.
I am so glad I don't associate with people like you. This is so disgusting.
So, like, wait, what do you think the question that I'm trying to ask you is?
I think it's really gross that you were like, oh, it's just a pronoun change. Like, why are you putting drugs into this? That is so, like, manipulative because you're so aware that right after a pronoun change, most of the time comes HRT.
So let's try to talk about it one step at a time. I'm only asking about the pronoun change step right now. I'm not asking about the hormone stuff because obviously we disagree about the hormones. But I'm asking you just independently, what's wrong with, like, a pronoun change?
Right. And oh my God, because most of the time a pronoun change is going to lead to HRT. And that's my final answer. I'm not dancing around this topic with you.
So pronoun changes are bad because HRT is bad?
For minors, absolutely.
But pronoun changes don't mean that you're going to go on HRT.
If it's a pronoun change in the binary, which you said is what we were talking about, most of the time that's going to lead to HRT.
It would really depend, but that doesn't mean that the pronoun change is harmful.
Right, but you know what that leads to. You're very aware of what that leads to.
Well, I guess, like, my question to you is, like, where's, like, the delineation point? Like, at what point does something become harmful? Like,
harmful? It wouldn't be harmful if we weren't teaching children what trans and non-binary was in school. I think that would be helpful. Let's start there.
So, but we've already pointed out why there is harms in not teaching about trans people, because trans people are going to be bullied more if we don't teach about trans people. Just like how gay people are bullied more if we don't teach about gay people.
That's, again, and we've already been over why those two things are different. And I'm not going to say that again because that was a lengthy statement. Again, it's not the same thing.
Okay, so, like, why What's wrong with taking steps to reduce bullying?
Yeah, because you're changing a child's gender in order to do that. We shouldn't have to change.
You don't have to change a child's gender in order to reduce bullying. You can just teach about the existence of trans people, and that doesn't change somebody's gender.
Oh,
just like how you can teach a kid that, like, firefighters exist, but that doesn't make them a firefighter.
Because clearly teaching about because it's gone farther than just teaching kids what trans people are. I don't think they should know in general, but it's not even just, like you say it like it's a simple teaching, like, oh, sometimes boys can transition to be girls. And that's going to get a child curious. They're going to be like, wait, like that can happen. Like, and then they're going to probably do research. Every kid has a phone now. There's a reason why more youth in high school are identifying as trans and non-binary than ever before. And I know you probably think that's a positive, great thing, but it's not to me.
So wait a minute. If, like, a kid hears about a trans person and they think, holy shit, that sounds just like me, I want to look into, like, what this trans stuff is, doesn't that mean they're probably trans?
That's indoctrination.
But, like, if a kid, like, hears about trans people, is like, yeah, I do want to be the other gender, that's what I've known my entire time, but now I have the language to actually express that, doesn't that mean that they're actually trans?
I'm not saying that doesn't exist in the very rare case
like,
scenario.
I mean, I can use myself as an example here, where I'm somebody who ever since I was born and ever since I had an understanding of gender, I wish that I was a girl. I wish that I was, treated as a girl. I've wished that I could live my life being female, but I never had the language to understand that I was transgender until I was 21 years old, because this stuff wasn't taught to me. If I was actually taught what being transgender was, I would have been able to find out about who I really am at a younger age, and I would have been able to access medical care, which would have helped me at a younger age. And that would have been a good thing for me.
But at the cost of confusing a shit ton of other kids. How lucky for you.
I don't think it's confusing to kids. Kids understand this stuff pretty well. So, like when you teach kids about the existence of trans people, they're just like, okay, that's cool. And if they're not trans, they don't want to be the other gender. It's pretty simple.
You're never going to convince me that kids transitioning is okay.
Right, because you're bad faith.
No, because I know what I stand for what I believe in, which is protecting kids.
I literally defined the term bad faith for you, and you categorically meet the definition.
Okay.
Like, what do you think bad faith means?
Oh my God. Why are you, like, asking me all the time, like, what these terms mean?
Because you don't know what they mean. Because you clearly don't know what they mean.
Have you seen this?
Bad faith means I don't have bad faith, because I'm assuming that means I have bad intentions, which is the last thing I have.
I've already told you that bad faith does not mean bad intentions. Like, does everything I say just go in one ear and out the other? Is that why you can't respond to any of my hypotheticals? Is that why you always go off on a completely different tangent when I ask you a question? Like, it's very clear that you're not listening to anything I'm saying.
No, it's very clear that I just disagree, and now you're going on this little rant to make it seem like you're doing something, when in reality, I've given you responses to everything you've said, very logical responses.
So I've already told you that what bad faith actually means is somebody who is so closed-minded that they will always refuse to change their mind, even if presented contrary evidence that falsifies their claims, and you categorically meet that definition of bad faith.
Apologize. That means you won the debate. Good for you. Take the win. You deserve it.
Thank you.
You literally are just spewing BS, because this whole time I've given you logical responses. If you want to pretend like that's false, that's on you. I don't know if that's another coping mechanism.
Your logical responses, like the appeal to nature fallacy, like the ad populum fallacy, like slaves actually enjoyed being slaves. Perfectly logical responses, okay.
You are a child abuser. You want children to be abused, straight up.
No, I want children to be able to access evidence-based medical care, which is shown to improve their lives and reduce the chances of them killing themselves.
No. You're a predator.
I mean, if the world that you're advocating for becomes the world that we live in, there is going to be a graveyard of trans kids with your blood on their hands.
No, I think the blood's going to be on your hands when we have a shit ton of kids detransitioning when they're older, or when we have a completely genderless society because of sick people like you.
Just curious, like, what would be wrong with a genderless society?
Have you seen this, Naomi?
Because that's not the way the world is meant to be. It's man and woman.
Why was the world meant to be, like, with a binary gender?
Because there's two genders for a reason.
What's the reason?
Genitalia.
But do you think gender's different from sex?
Okay, I do, but I said 95%.
Wait, hold up. even in like the world where there's no gender, people would still be like we would still have these male female sex characteristic designations, and people would still have penises and vaginas, but like we just wouldn't gender people. Like, what's wrong with the genderless world?
No, we would come up, it might not have been the term man or woman, but we would have come up with new words for it. There would still be two.
I mean, there would still be biological sex, obviously, but imagine a world with yes, biological sex still exists, but gender doesn't exist. Like, what's bad about that world?
That gender doesn't exist, that wouldn't be a world that would ever exist, because it wouldn't be that way. When people saw man and woman and noticed the like subtle differences between the two, that people would come to believe that there are two genders and two sexes.
Are you incapable of engaging with a hypothetical?
Excuse me?
Are you incapable of engaging with a hypothetical?
No, I'm very capable, but I just don't think it would ever happen. People, even like two people that are the first people born in the world, they're going to look at each other and say there's a man and a woman. There's two. They'll have a child and realize it either comes out a boy or a girl. Can I just do like a quick test to see if you're capable of engaging with like a hypothetical? Wow. Are you like, is it impossible for you to like have context like when I respond?
No, I'm happy to like go on your point, but just really quick, I want to see if you're like just capable of engaging with a hypothetical in general. Can I ask you like a scenario?
Getting nasty.
I'm just curious. Like, can I ask you the scenario?
Yes, yeah, go for it.
Okay, so like imagine if you hadn't had lunch today, like how would you feel?
Probably normal.
What do you mean probably normal?
I'd be hungry. I'd be hungry.
Yeah, that's the point. We can like imagine a scenario where the world is different. And so what if we like imagine a scenario where the world, we don't really assign a gender. We don't treat people as men or women. We just treat everybody as like a person. And yeah, biological sex still exists. Like, what would be wrong with that hypothetical world?
Because it's just not the way things are meant to be. There's a reason we have man and woman. It's to create, like, reproduce. You
can still reproduce in the genderless world. The reproduction is based off of biological sex, not gender.
At that point, if they didn't come up with, like, they wouldn't be differentiating it. They wouldn't even, like, probably break it into two terms. They would probably just say sex and think sex meant sex and gender. If we're really
the idea is that they wouldn't have gender. They would just have like sex in this hypothetical world.
I think so. I think that makes the most sense.
So you're a gender abolitionist?
I'm not a gender. I don't even know what that means. I'm just saying that based on your hypothetical situation,
Have you seen this?
I think that's how things would go. I don't think they would be like, oh, there's gender and sex. No, they would look, see the private parts, and then just say, oh, man, woman, and it's sex. And they probably wouldn't even like consider gender. They probably just think it was the same thing as sex.
Okay, I'm talking about a world where sex is recognized, but gender isn't. So, for example, there wouldn't be concepts of man or woman. This would be like what a gender abolitionist would think would be better, where a gender abolitionist would say that, you know, gender, or at least the expectation or enforcement of gender, like the idea that men ought to behave a certain way, or the idea that women ought to behave a certain way, just off of the basis of having certain genitals, or on the basis of like presenting themselves a certain way, that these kind of expectations and roles being enforced or expected of people is harmful.
Because you'd probably, I mean, for one, you'd probably ruin intimacy. Like, I mean, there's a reason, like...
How would that ruin intimacy?
It probably would ruin intimacy.
How?
I mean, there would be no chase anymore.
What? Why?
There's not, like... Women are attracted to men because they're masculine. Men are attracted to women because they're feminine. Like, these are things that we're naturally attracted to. If you get rid of them, there's not going to be as much desire.
Wait. Even in a world where we like don't have expectations or enforcement surrounding like gender roles, like there would still be people who have the traits which we presently consider masculine. There would still be people that we have the traits that we presently consider feminine. There would still be people that have traits which we presently consider androgynous. And people are attracted to like all different types and sorts of people. And like attraction would still exist even if we like didn't enforce or expect gender roles of people.
So here's my issue. I don't think your hypothetical makes sense, because if those things are true, I think a lot of people would conform to the binary then.
Okay. So I guess like I just don't see how that would ruin intimacy in any kind of way. I mean, like there are people who are attracted to like non-binary people, and there are people who are attracted to like androgynous people. Like even if we didn't have these binary notions of gender, people would still experience like attraction. Like animals don't really have like a binary notion of gender, but they still like end up fucking. And actually, it seems to be the case that kind of the default sexuality we observe in animals is like bisexuality predominantly.
No, I'll give you that. I mean, in some, not all. I wouldn't say a lot. There's some species that engage in bisexuality.
We have never observed exclusive heterosexuality in any species.
I've only heard of like monkeys and penguins and tigers, I think.
Lions too. Well, basically every species, it's been observed that like homosexuality and heterosexuality occurs to some extent if they use like this heterosexual form of reproduction. It seems to be that bisexuality is kind of just the default in most cases.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, I would agree with you that I think there are definitely people who are like straight and people who are gay, but I think a lot of that has to do with conditioning of society and just like, I think if we lived in a world where we had no media, I think people would probably be more bisexual more often. I think a big reason why a lot of people are straight is because like they or gay is because it's like who you have the most attracted. I don't know how to really explain what I'm saying.
Like I agree with you there, but doesn't that contradict your earlier claim that like that like your sexuality is like innate?
I don't know. You know, it's a tough one because I really don't know. Because I'm like, I really don't know. Sexuality is such a complicated topic.
Yeah, as is like gender identity, for example. No, I agree that sexuality is fluid, but like, I think, you know, you've had to like fall back on this idea that like one's sexuality is like entirely innate and natural, and that like societal conditioning can't really affect it. But like, it seems that that's not really the case with sexuality.
That's not, I don't feel like it's the same thing though to me, because like,
I'm not saying it's the same thing.
Well, not in like, I know it's not the same thing, but I'm just like, in terms of like, I think people are naturally, if there weren't like all this propaganda of, oh, it's bad to be gay, or if you're gay, you're gay. Like, I really feel like if there wasn't all this media, people would probably be more straight or be more on the gay side, but they'd be probably more open to like experimentation if we lived in like a media-free world. I think bisexuality is a natural thing for humans to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
But I think gender is different because I don't think that's a natural thing. I don't think me having the feeling of wanting to do a gender transition is natural compared to probably just like the basic form of a human that hasn't been exposed to media would probably be more naturally bisexual. I don't think gender's the same thing because it's involving going completely against nature.
I mean, we do have anthropological evidence of trans people existing even before we had like mass media and even in like the earliest of human cultures and societies.
Is that not just like a defect of the human condition?
I don't know if I'd call it a defect. Typically, the way that we define something as like a defect or an illness would be based off of like clinically significant distress or disability, which I think that gender dysphoria certainly can constitute clinically significant distress or disability. But there are also trans people that don't experience their gender in like a distressing or debilitating way.
Okay.
But it definitely seems to be the case that, you know, just like how bisexuality was common and was kind of the default in like earlier societies based off of anthropological evidence, we also have evidence showing that like trans people and other forms of like gender identities were also pretty common in like earlier human societies. So doesn't that also give evidence that this is kind of just like a phenomenon that occurs? I mean, we also have like even transgender behaviors observed in like lots of animals even. And I'm not just talking about animals that have the capability to like change their sex, like clownfish. There are examples of animals like lions, where it's like one lion will like change the length of their mane and like take on the role of like the other sex.
They do that naturally.
Yeah. And what if trans people express like what if trans people manifest their gender identity naturally in a similar fashion?
To me, what it means to be transgender, at least in my opinion, you're doing something completely unnatural, which is going on HRT and getting surgeries. That's not natural.
Okay, but what about before we had access to like medical transition, and we had people who like wanted to, you know, live in a different gender role, for example. These would be like trans people before we had access to HRT.
They're probably just trans people who didn't get an opportunity to transition.
Mm-hmm. And this is kind of like a lot more analogous to the types of transgender behaviors we see in animals, for example, right? So doesn't that kind of show that it's natural?
I don't really think so, because they can do it naturally with their bodies compared to humans who have to get surgery and take drugs.
There are like they're like animals that you know, aren't even changing their sex, but just rather changing their role and or their presentation. And like humans can do that too, even before we had HRT. And they did doing that.
I just don't agree. To me, it doesn't feel like the same thing. It feels like a very unnatural thing for humans.
I guess like I don't see how like a social transition could be perceived as unnatural before we had access to HRT. Like much of the same way that you don't see that sexuality as being something unnatural. Like why would like a social transition be something that's unnatural?
That's not a transition though. A social transition without HRT is just drag.
I don't think it's the same thing as drag, because drag is something you take off at night. But a social transition isn't just something you take off at night.
So makeup and wearing female clothing makes you a woman?
It's not what I said.
I don't even think that makes you a trans woman.
I mean, like, before we had access to HRT, that's, like consistently living and presenting in a different gender role and fulfilling the roles of, like, a different gender was kind of, like, the only option people had to transition back then.
But there really wasn't a transition taking place.
Well, I don't think that, like, transsexual people existed back then because we didn't have the technology for it yet. But it seems that the concept of, like, a transgender person did exist back then, both with respect to, like, trans identity as well as, you know, transgender expression.
I don't know. It's just not natural.
And I guess, like, the problem with defining transgender exclusively as transsexual people, like you're doing, is that it ignores the rich history of transgender people, which have existed throughout early human societies and cultures.
So if they're transgender people, I mean, it's just, you can't compare that because they didn't have access to the things we have now. So it's just uncomparable. I don't think that's a fair comparison.
Maybe you can compare it with respect to, like, a social transition. I think that it's pretty strong evidence that things like, you know, the two-spirit populations of various Native American tribes seem to be a pretty legitimate social phenomenon, which has occurred across lots of different human societies and cultures, and which has allowed people to express themselves and live lives in ways which are more satisfying and fulfilling to them. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be medicalized for some people.
Right, but to me, they could be really trans people because they would have had, if they had the access to HRT back then, if they would have done it, then yes, to me, they would have been really trans people who didn't get the opportunity to transition.
Well, they might also be transsexual, but they might also not. I mean, it definitely seems to be the case that there are transgender people out there who are not transsexual while still benefiting from a social transition.
I don't think they're transgender.
Well, I'm not saying that they're transsexual. I'm saying that they're transgender but not transsexual.
I don't agree that it's separate. I think by your definition, I think transsexual is the only thing.
But you recognize the difference between gender and sex, right?
Correct.
So shouldn't there also be a difference between transgender and transsexual?
I don't think so, because there's not really a transition taking place at that point besides your pronoun.
I mean, it's definitely more than just pronouns. At that point, it would be also things like societal and cultural roles, other aspects of presentation, also like just the lives they live in within their society.
To me, if you're not medically transitioning, you're not trans.
Well,
if you can,
probably not transsexual.
Access. If you have access and you decide not to, I don't think you're trans.
I guess I don't really see like what we get by gatekeeping transsexual as the only valid type of trans. You know, obviously I recognize that there are differences between the lived experiences of people who are transsexual versus people who are not transsexual. And, you know, broadly speaking, yeah, there's differences there that we can recognize. But I just don't see what we have to gain by gatekeeping that only transsexuals count, for example.
Because to me, it feels disrespectful to everything my transition stood for. It feels like people are taking the transgender term and using it as a trend when you're not making any sort of transition, but you want to take that title.
What if like a transphobe says that taking the title of woman is doing that exact same thing to them?
That's why I don't call myself I'm a trans woman.
You don't think that you're a woman?
I think I'm a type of woman, but I think I'm a trans woman.
Yeah, obviously. Trans women are just a type of women, just like how cis women are a type of women, or intersex women are a type of women, or tall women are a type of women.
They're biological women. I'm not a biological woman.
You take issue with the term cis?
I have had a really hard time because I felt super pressured by the community to say cis instead of biological. And so many comments on TikTok made me feel like I had to start saying that. And now since I've, gone on to the right side of things, I'm so happy that I can be so honest and say biological woman or man if I want to, because I really don't agree with the term cis. Because let me tell you why. Like if I'm asking a biological woman to call me she, her, why am I going to go out of my way to disrespect her if she doesn't want to be called a cis woman and she just wants to be called a woman? It's a mutual respect thing.
Well, if she wants to be called a woman, I'm going to call her a woman. I only use the term cis in context where I specifically need to distinguish between differences between cis women and trans women. It's just about like using objective language. So particularly if we're talking about like a sociological context or a medical context, particularly like an academic context, it's really nice to have objective language to refer to these things, because terms like normal or real are absolutely subjectively loaded, and they could even be falsified. I can give you a really good example. This is a retronym. Cisgender is a retronym. It's a newly created word to refer to an already existing type of thing. Specifically, we want to distinguish it from a newly recognized type of thing. One really good example is, we have autistic people, and then the retronym to refer to people who are not autistic is allistic. If we were doing like a study on autistic people versus allistic people, it's really important to use that kind of objective language, because imagine if we like looked at the same study 100 years down the line, but in a different world now where most people are autistic. Should we now start saying that autistic people are the normal people, and then we have to use like allistic to refer to the weird outside category? If we just have the language of autistic and allistic, then regardless of how that population shifts, then we already have objective language to refer to this group.
But it's not about that. What the issue is, they have no issue with us having terms to differentiate, but they want the term to be biological woman. They don't want to be called cis. Why is it so offensive when I say biological woman or man?
I mean, I haven't said it's offensive. I think that kind of the problem with using the language of biological woman versus trans woman is that it ignores a lot of the ways in which transsexual people's biology does change when they medically transition, in ways that contribute to medical misinformation, the type of medical misinformation which has made it so that transsexual people and intersex people, for example, are less likely to get accurate medical care, because people have these overly binarized views of sex which do not reflect their actual biological realities and medical needs.
I don't think it's that hard to just know the difference between saying biological woman or trans woman. I think doctors would be very aware of the difference.
Yeah, I'm just saying that cis is like a more objective term, which doesn't have the potential to create this kind of like medical misinformation, which harms transsexual and intersex people.
Right, but we definitely should also be listening to biological women if they're going to, especially if they're respecting our pronouns. I think we should go out of our way to respect them and what they want to be called.
Well, sure, and I don't call people like cis women to their face.
Yeah, but like even in like your videos, like for example, if I ever made a video saying cis woman, I would get a lot of shit for that.
By
if I said or no, if I did say cis people would be mad at me. I can't win either way. I say cis, biological people get mad at me. I say biological, the LGBTQ community is mad at me.
This is also the really funny thing. You have to use a phrase like biological people. All people are biological, even if they're trans.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's just people.
Your term creates confusion.
It's not a contradiction because our biology is not really the same. Me simply taking estrogen doesn't mean my biology is completely the same as a biological.
Right, but saying that trans people are not biological people creates confusion, right?
They're not saying you're not a biological person. They're saying you're not a biological woman.
But you use the term biological people. What should we call the group of people who are not trans? Biological people? Cis people?
They should just be called man or woman.
But what should we do to refer to the group of men and women who are not trans?
In a medical setting, say they're a trans woman or man.
No, I'm asking, what do we refer to the entire group of men and women who are not trans? Like, under your worldview, we don't have a term for this, do we?
We call them a man or woman because we assume that when you say
I'm saying not just the individual, but the group including both.
You should only say someone's a trans woman if they're trans. Everyone else,
no,
like
I'm
the
not.
Majority.
Wait, I think you're misunderstanding me. I'm not asking what do we refer to the group of trans people. I'm asking what word should we use to refer to all cis people? Because I have the term cis people, and so far your only option is biological people, which we've shown is not a really good term.
This is hypocritical behavior.
Wait, no, I'm asking you, like, what term we can use to refer to all cis people, other than cis people.
And just man or woman, I answered the question.
No, I'm talking about the group. Like, the whole group, including both men and women.
People?
But people can be trans too, right?
Oh my God.
See, there's a problem. You don't have a term for that group of people.
Because the majority of the time, people know when we say man or woman, we're talking about the 95% of the population.
But I'm talking about the entire group of cis people. Like, if you don't use the term cis, you don't have an objective language to refer to cis men and cis women as one single group.
Why do you have to? You could just say
it's pretty important to have this information in, like, a medical context.
You could say biologically born people and then just man, woman, or people and then trans.
But trans people are also biologically born people.
I mean, yes, I get what you're saying.
Your terminology is illogical, Kelly.
I mean, if you're talking in terms of like a study that's like comparing trans people to biologically born people, yes, I could see how cis might be a term you could use, but I feel like it should only be used when it's absolutely needed, not even in a medical setting. If there's an emergency, no one should be like, we have a cis woman coming in. It should be, no, a woman's coming in. The only time a difference should be made is when someone like me comes in. You should just say, oh, it's a trans woman. I think a majority of the time, like, unless it's like a super specific study, cis is really not needed.
Yeah, I definitely agree that, like, the entire purpose of cis is only when you're trying to distinguish cis people from trans people.
So why do you say cis all the time in your videos if you could get away with saying biological or just saying man, woman, and then trans person?
Well, specifically if I need to distinguish cis women from trans women, which ends up happening quite a bit because I have to talk about, like, differences in lived experience or differences in biological reality, where I'm comparing cis people versus trans people. And you've already demonstrated how the biological language has flaws in terminology and how we can't refer to cis people as one group because the term biological people or biological born people or just people doesn't make sense to refer to that group.
That it only should be used when you absolutely need it. In most of your videos, you could get away with just saying biological woman and trans woman. There's no need to differentiate most of the time, but you still go out of your way to do it.
But if you're saying biological woman, you're already distinguishing them. You're already acknowledging that there's a need to distinguish, which means that it's an appropriate use of the term cis.
To you, not to a lot of biologically born women who are offended by it.
Okay. I mean, cis is just an objective factual term, and I mean, they might feel differently about it, but it's just objective language. Just like how I don't think that the term autistic or allistic are offensive.
I mean, I guess that depends. I mean, yeah, I'll agree with you on that. But listen, this is really great debate. I hate to cut it short, but like, I gotta get to bed because it's 1:30 and I gotta be up early tomorrow.
Yeah, totally. Sleep is important. Well, thank you so much for coming on for the debate. I appreciate it. Hope you have a lovely night.
And listen, I just want to say, like, I know like a lot of like harsh things were said, but I really did enjoy the conversation and even parts that we fought, even if we disagree on a lot. I do genuinely like having these conversations with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And let me know if you want to talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye.
Bye. All right. That was crazy. That was kind of crazy. I'm still losing it over the slavery part of the conversation. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I guess I was disappointed to see like the bad faith approach to like studies on providing medical transition for trans youth. But I think that she was having a good faith convo at the end, or at least somewhat good faith, which I appreciate. The convo at the end definitely seemed like she was more open to kind of hearing things out. So maybe she's not bad faith on all topics. Maybe just kind of bad faith on the medical topic right now. I'm losing it over her saying you absolutely passed until she realized you were Enby and then she changed her tune. Yeah, true. Definitely was very different on those two aspects of it. That was pretty wild. That was pretty wild. Oh my goodness. She's not bad faith at all. She's just not a skilled debater. Well, she explicitly said that she doesn't care what the studies say. She could never be convinced that medical transition would be a good thing to provide to trans kids. That's admitting to be bad faith with respect to like the medical transition topic. I'm not saying that all of her, all of her positions are bad faith, but it seems that her medical transition position is a bad faith position.